The meeting to order. Welcome to the West Hartford Public Schools regular Board of Education meeting. It is Tuesday, May the 17th, 2022. Charlotte, may you please call the roll?
Dr. Chang.
He'll be coming late.
Mr. Goldman.
Here.
Dr. Harris.
Here.
Ms. Nazarella.
Present.
Ms. Poland.
Here.
Dr. Steinberg.
Here.
Dr. Thomas Farquharson.
Here.
Student Representative Andrew Maglio.
Excused.
Student Representative Avery Woods Weber.
Excused. Thank you. Claire, may you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We do not have a revision to the agenda order, and now is the time for public communications. This is where we are able to hear from those of you in the audience. We're able to hear your thoughts, your comments, your suggestions. Each person has 3 minutes to share their thoughts, and there are 21 minutes per subject matter. We ask that individuals, once you're at the podium, to please share your name and your address. And one thing that really is important, and it's said every time, and we'll continue to do so, please be mindful of sharing your thoughts in a respectful way. We are here to hear from you, but we certainly appreciate when it's delivered with respect. Now, be mindful that per board policy, we do not respond as comments are being made, but we are attentively listening. So I have a list here with some names, and we will begin with Eleanor Farquhar. Thank you. And before we call the next speaker, one thing I was remiss to share, which was not a challenge this go-round, was Charlotte will hold up a yellow card when you have 1 minute remaining in your time, and a red card when your time has expired, and we'll ask you to please to respectfully take your seat at that time. Next, we have Catrice, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name. Yes, please, thank you. Pardon me, ma'am. Can you hold just 1 moment? We're having, I think, an issue with our sound. We want to make sure to capture every voice. Just a moment, please. Thank you. Yes, we'll improvise. Thank you so much.
I'll hit the button.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, my name is Catrice Rogers, and I'm a mother of a child who has kidney disease, migraines, dislocated shoulder, allergies, asthma, and IBS. It's hard taking care of him with my own disabilities, but I do my best. I've been part of PTO since elementary at Charter Oak, and here I was the vice president of communications. I had an idea to get more people in. At first I was laughed at, but the idea was simple. Get pizza. See, in New York, everybody loves pizza. Oily, dripping, and it brings people. No one thought it would bring anybody, but boxes of pizza brought a lot of people. I'm telling you this because that's where I started with nothing. And that's how I started helping in West Hartford. I'm now a treasurer and also part of community concern. I've been helping for a while with everything going on. I don't know how, but I have. And when I'm at the meeting on Zoom, everyone is friendly. But when I came to the event, people stared at me like I had a rash. No one introduced themselves. They moved away from me. And I even went up to a person to say hi. She walked away. But on Zoom, she was my friend. She was okay to talk to me. It made me feel like, why did I even take the bus to come here? Because I take a bus. I lost an hour of my time that maybe I could have wiped down my house again because my kid has allergies. I came out here for what? And I left. Afterwards, I was told that we chatted. We didn't. I felt unwelcomed. I felt like I didn't belong. I fight every day just to show everybody that I'm a human. And now when I come to this, I'm not welcomed. But my ID says West Hartford. And it says that I'm a woman, 5 foot. So I am human. And I do belong. Now can you make sure that I belong there too? Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Lori Schwartz.
Do you want me here or there?
Let's see if it works. Does not work there, then there, please.
Good evening.
Is it?
Good evening. My name is Lori Schwartz. I'm a West Hartford resident. I was educated in the West Hartford Public Schools, and I'm a former West Hartford public school teacher. I strongly oppose any and all implementation of transgender education in the West Hartford Public Schools. There is a reason why Abigail Schreier wrote the book Irreversible Damage. Among her many warnings is the growing contagion effect among young females who are permanently changing their bodies and may later regret this decision. There is a reason why Mary Hassan Rice wrote the book Get Out Now. She does not believe that the public schools are safe places. Families are increasingly finding that there is no respect for diversity or for their own family values. They protect their children in homeschooling and in private schools. And there's a reason why anguished parents of trans kids are forming numerous support groups to help them cope with the aftermath of the known hazards of this ideology. They have formed parent groups such as GenSpec, Partners for Ethical Care, Our Duty, Transgender Trends, and Parents with Inconvenient Truths About Trans, and the Fourth Wave Now. The aftermath that they are facing based on this experiment with young children is something that they would not wish on their worst enemy. They face school systems that will not share information with them about their very own children, a court system that protects the civil rights of a child to transition against their parents' wishes, and gender clinics that offer life-altering paths to children and young adults. Some colleges provide the medical hormone blockers and cross-sex hormones right on their campuses, and even will pay for surgeries for their students. Let's remember what we are talking about. Presenting these ideologies to children in the West Hartford Public Schools will necessarily lead some of them to decide to transition. You cannot claim that your curriculum does not influence students, and often at inappropriate developmental stages or against their parents' beliefs. I would go so far to say that the curriculum has the risk of indoctrinating the children into a point of view that sometimes is not shared by their teachers and often is not appreciated or shared by their parents. Just as a solid academic curriculum will necessarily lead most children to go to college, introducing a social construct of gender to children will lead some to seek to change their sex. You have no right to introduce this point of view to the children in the West Hartford Public Schools, and thereby spreading it to other nearby schools. In doing so, you will be confusing many children, dividing many families, and leading children in a direction that has ramifications far beyond what they can comprehend. Let's be clear what we are talking about.
Excuse me, your time is up.
Can I just finish one paragraph?
No, I'm sorry, your time is up. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Testing.
All right.
There we go.
There we go. Thank you so much. All right. Yes, thank you. And now we will have Anita.
Hello, Anita Rakelian, 48 West Normandy Drive. Hold on one second. I thought a lot of what to say for tonight, given what occurred today, and I did send an email, and you did receive it. Tyranny begins, and it begins with the simple ignoring of laws, or in our case, the BOE's policies and bylaws. These policies and bylaws were written, voted on, and put in place in part to protect the public at large. And yes, this includes the school employees, the members of the board, we the residents, and our children, the students. One of the most important policies is Policy 8310, which states that any substantive amendments of policies and bylaws shall be made only after a second public reading. Jason Chang was the person who put forth the policy for changing the names. He made two mistakes. One, he did not hold the second reading. Two, the motion he put forth was flawed with the fact that he did not speak about Provision 2, which is material when it comes to making the motion. Without a full two readings of a motion that would amend Policy 1700, West Hartford Public Schools is not allowed to change the mascots. To attempt to do so would give cause for the public to seek remedies in the courts. Jason Chang has to consider, does he want to use our money that we give to educate our children tied away in the court system? For those of us who have lived and worked on foreign soil, there are only a few government constitutions that are over 250 years old. The U.S. Constitution, with its amendments, is one of those. Our Constitution allows for peaceful change in a society without revolution and/or coups d'états. Any student who is a product of a curriculum of excellence would know this. On the same topic of following policies and procedures, I present another situation where there was an infraction by a board member. In this case, it was an infraction of an important right provided to the people by the people, and that is the right to obtain public records. I am speaking about the Freedom of Information Act, a Connecticut state statute. Jason Chang made a technical violation when he did not respond within 4 days to my Freedom of Information Act request as required by the Connecticut state statute. This brings me to the most painful situation I find myself, that certain employees of our West Hartford Public Schools are not following the policies, procedures meant to protect the public. I want to remind everyone in this room that any member of the public, and yes, that includes you, Jason, that includes Andrew Morrow, and that includes Paul Vicens, that all of us have the right to inquire about how public funds are used by principals of schools. We have the right that our district's director of finance provide records that reflect accurate and thorough accounting of all public funds. We have these rights without fear of retaliation, of coercion, or of hearing that our children are pulled out of the classroom unnecessarily and seeing our children slandered. That is a very strong comment.
Thank you. Next, we have Getchen.
Good evening. As you may tell, I'm from a different continent, from Africa. And when I was there in Africa, many of us, if we have been given a choice to go between heaven and America, many of the people would choose America, not heaven. Why am I saying this? America is the greatest nation on earth because of, not you are a different human being, but because of education, I believe. Education, the previous generation put huge value to education, and many of the greatest schools on earth are here in America, the Ivy Leagues and many other great universities. Those 6 scientists who put America on top of World War II, the Manhattan Project scientists, they put America on top not because of any ideology, but because of science. They were all physicists. But today, American school system is a laughingstock of the world. Nobody, I can tell you, would choose American education system because today, public schools would teach 2 genders would be like abominable. Gender is not between man and woman, but there are hundreds of genders. This is against science. And there are many, many other things that are really killing the education system. So I would like to advise or bring to your attention, please let us not mess up with the education system, and especially in the public school, because it is the cornerstone of society. If you see my family, many of my family left behind because they are farmers. They will never went to school. School education rules. So let us give much value and much respect for education system, especially in public school. Instead of putting all those, pronouns, nouns, all kinds of garbages, please let us focus on math, science, engineering, technology, and all other things like computer science. Thank you.
Thank you. That's all who I have listed here. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak? Yes, please come to the podium. Yes.
Hello, my name is Mary of 43 Acadia Street. I previously spoke on April 19th as an RN mandated reporter with nursing background in school nursing, teaching nursing, developmental psychology, physical assessment, and adolescent psychiatric nursing. I am predominantly a certified occupational health nurse specialist and transcultural nurse. I've reviewed Rosanna Haskins' report for tonight's citing, and what she proposes is, quote, new research and longitudinal evidence of a particular case for adding the contended field of gender identity content to West Hartford. The research is not new, it's 2015. It is not a longitudinal study, it's only 5 years. It's not landmark, 300 participants. It's not published yet, the second study, but I will include a separate research analysis in a different document. My 3 points are about developmental childhood theory. Developmental theories of Kohlberg, 1966, show children do not integrate the meaning of, quote, sexual constancy until age 12 and later. This means natal sex is not grasped as immutable during the latency period, Freud, of school ages respective 6 to 12 years. This period of innocence should be protected by the Board of Education, the superintendent, school administrators, and the equity and diversity advisors, and it's possible to protect it. This is the age when children want to be children. They're generally inclined and attracted to their own sex, and they make friends with their own sex, and they avoid using the other one. When I was a child, we used to call it cooties. And they accept psychomotor and academic talent challenges and tasks, not necessarily driven by anything that is seen in gender identity. Safety, belonging, and a positive self-image are the hoped-for expected outcome. The second stage, or the pubescent tasks, which begin between the ages of 12 and 18, are hormone-driven, as seen in Erickson's psychosocial theory, with sexual identity driven by a secondary sexual sex trait. And sexual affirmation of what is happening in the child's body is undermined and it's harmed by something called gender identity theory and curriculum, which separates from what is happening in the body from the mind without any informed consent of parents and legal guardians. And mandatory school attendance should not be interpreted as tacit consent. My third point about informed consent is generally given in writing. It's a foundational principle of all research. Opting out and how to do it needs to be explained in a written statement to parents, and that's generally signed. Otherwise, the schools should not be able to collect and give data without permission, which includes surveys,
Your time is
read-alouds,
up.
and all such activities.
Excuse me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ripley Heinz, 93 Brace Road, West Hartford, Connecticut. My dad was born here, class of Hall High, 1950 graduate. I currently have a 15-year-old daughter at Conard. She's a freshman. I'm really nervous public speaking. And I have a 7th grader at Sedgwick. Clover is about to be 13. They came out to me as non-binary at the beginning of 6th grade. I am a parent experiencing this. And yeah, I was raised Catholic, and yep, I am an open-minded person. Clover was born Evelyn and is neurodiverse, so she's dyslexic, or they are dyslexic. Parenting comes with a lot. I don't think that changing mascots is tyrannical. I wrote a letter about that. Everyone's can have their own opinion about that. But 7th grade is an era of bullying. Everyone survives 7th grade. Middle school is tough. You don't want to go to the bathroom because it's embarrassing. You don't want to stand out because it's stressful. Everybody's just trying to learn and get by. And I'm in this parent leadership training institute group right now that gave me the courage to even come out of here. My community project that I'm working on is normalizing non-binary, understanding NB, which is ENBY, short, kind of a nickname for non-binary. So yeah, things are changing. Do I think that it's contagious? No, pretty sure it's not contagious. Do I have all the statutes and the research and all of that? You know, I went to grad school at Yale for forestry. I don't have all of that. But I know what my kid's experiencing, and I know how evolution in the world happens, not just biologically, but socioeconomically, emotionally, so on and so forth. So I would say you guys are doing a great job. I've got a yellow flag. I can write all this down too. And Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to make a comment?
Hi, Cindy Gauthier, 44 Manchester Circle. I seem to like to get up here spontaneously because I'm never planned to speak, but just wanted to throw something out there. I was here a couple meetings ago, spoke about my daughter's challenges with special education in this town and my frustrations that have been going on since elementary school, and she's now a junior at Conard. And I stayed late and listened to Melanie Thomas's presentation to all of you, and did that so that I could have an opportunity to speak to her in the hallway afterwards. Had a nice conversation. She assured me she was going to address some of my concerns and that my daughter's guidance counselor would be contacting me the next day. That was 4 weeks ago. I haven't heard from anyone. So this has just proven my point that our schools suck. They treat our children terribly, and they are never accountable for what they do. And nothing ever changes. And my kid's a junior, and it's still not changing. And I've had enough. So I'm getting to the point where I'm ready to start legal action against the town because I'm done. I'm done asking for supports that I pay taxes for, supports that my child is entitled to, and a future for her that she deserves, just like anybody else's straight A student does that gets all the attention in this town. Thank you.
Any other comments from anyone in the audience? Please approach the podium. Please share your name and your address.
It's Mark Greenstein. I'm at 2 Cross Hill Road. And it's really a question for you who bravely spoke. I sympathize, but it's a question for everyone here with experience about what you said, that you understand evolution. And the question is, why so recently, if what's happening to your daughter and some other kids is evolutionary, why is it so sudden that we have this plethora of kids who are or claim to be non-binary? All right, it's a sincere question for anyone with knowledge.
Sir, pardon. Want to hear from you, but please direct your comments in general, not to anyone specifically at all, please.
Okay, so if anyone, whether it's members of the board, experts beyond here or in here, who could teach us about the sudden influx that this board has to deal with and educate all of us about whether this is evolution or the alternative that a lot of people put forward is it is being taught in a more directed way. And if there's evidence of that, this board should know too. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other comments from anyone in the audience? I'll ask one more time. All right, we now will pause on public comments. And we'll move on to unfinished business, which we do not have any at this time, and on to new business, where we will explore the State of Connecticut Healthy Food Certification 2022-2023. Excuse me, please lower your voices. Thank you. The recommendation is that the Board of Education adopt the following motions. Pursuant to C.G.S. Section 10-21(5)(f), the Board of Education certifies that all food items offered for sale to students in the schools under its jurisdiction and not exempted from the Connecticut Nutrition Standards published by the Connecticut State Department of Education will comply with the Connecticut Nutrition Standards during the period of July 1, 2022 through June 30th, 2023. This certification shall include all food offered for sale to students separately from reimbursable meals at all times and from all sources, including but not limited to school stores, vending machines, school cafeterias, culinary programs, and any fundraising activities on the school premises sponsored by the school or non-school organizations and groups. The next piece is the Board of Education allows the sale to students of food items that do not meet the Connecticut Nutrition Standards and beverages not listed in Section 10-221Q of the Connecticut General Statutes, provided that the following conditions are met. 1. The sale is in connection with an event occurring after the end of the regular school day or on the weekend. 2. The sale is at the location of the event. And 3. The food and beverage items are not sold from a vending machine or school store. An event is an occurrence that involves more than just a regularly scheduled practice, meeting, or extracurricular activity. The regular school day is the period from midnight before to 30 minutes after the end of the official school day. Location means where the event is being held and must be the same place as the food and beverage sales. So, with all of that, Liz, thank you so much for joining us. We'll pass it to you, please.
Thank you very much. As you read in great detail there, we have before us the annual State of Connecticut Healthy Food Certification. This certification, in summary, commits us to following the Connecticut Nutrition Standards for all food that we sell in our cafeterias and in our schools. Not only is this good practice, but it also enables us to receive an additional 10-cent per meal reimbursement for every meal that's served in our cafeterias. West Hartford Public Schools has been participating in this program and certifying that we will follow these standards since 2007, and this is a motion before you tonight to continue to do so. It's relatively straightforward, but I'm certainly happy to answer any questions that any of you might have.
Thank you so much, Liz. Teammates, any questions? Ethan.
This is probably a stupid question. This is just the same as the prior year and the prior year and the prior year?
It is. It's the same certification. The state has a template language that they require us to adopt,
Okay.
but the standards are the same, and it is the same certification that we have seen in prior years.
How much is at the bottom bullet point? I was just curious.
How much do we receive because of this?
Yeah.
Yes, so it's based on the number of meals that we serve. So in 19...
No, I meant the last bullet point, the one about the outside of school hours. I assume it's relatively insignificant, is it?
It is.
Okay.
It is. Primarily, it's food that is served during the day. The outside of school is very limited in nature.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Hearing none, with the first motion that was read the mouthful, please don't ask me to read it again. Is there a motion to accept the motion that was initially read?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion. All of those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. All right, and with the second bullet point that was read, the recommendation, is there a motion to accept that recommendation?
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? All of those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the ayes have it. Thank you so very much. And with that, now moving on to staff communications and reports. We now will hear from our Assistant Superintendent, soon-to-be Superintendent, Dr. Murrow.
All right, so I apologize. We have a bunch of stuff, and I have some stuff from our students as well. And so we have a bunch of stuff and wanted to share this as well from our students. And so I want to make sure that I get everything all set for us here. Let me start off by congratulating Conard Sr., Maya Palantic, who received a letter from the Secretary of Education on Thursday naming her one of two 2022 U.S. Presidential Scholars from Connecticut, and just one of 161 students from across the country to receive this recognition. It is a fantastic honor, and the entire school is very proud of her for this. We also had 4 seniors from West Hartford, members of both Conard and Hall's football teams, were among the 13 scholar athletes honored on Sunday at the Doc Boiseau Northern Connecticut Chapter National Football Foundation and College Hall of Fame banquet at AquaTurf. That would be Jack Kennedy and Oliver Held were named scholar athletes from Conard, and Colin Richard and Matthew Farber from Hall received the honor at the 55th annual banquet. It's nice that we're actually meeting again in places like AquaTurf and having these banquets. They are an important part of the high school experience. If you get a chance, earlier this evening we had a fantastic presentation for the Biennial Collection, the art collection, which is the permanent, semi-permanent, I should say, art that's on display throughout the 4th floor. And these are student work that every couple of years are changed out to really reflect some of the great things that our students are doing across the grade levels, K through 12, in various art classes. And so if you get a chance to check that out, I would recommend that. I have from Andrew, who apologizes that he can't attend this evening, that Conard sports teams are wrapping up their seasons in the coming week, and many sports teams are having their matches against Hall this week, so hopefully the weather holds. Last week, Conard did hold a very successful junior prom at Glastonbury Hills Country Club, as well as the junior award night earlier in the week. The senior prom, which is in Simsbury, will be hosted next week with Conard. Earlier today, Conard, Farmington, and Hall hosted the 2nd annual Equity Symposium with 12 schools in attendance. Over 80 students from across Connecticut discussed topics such as hijabophobia, colorism, and code switching, among others, during the day, 8:30 to 1 o'clock. And final voting, I should share, for Conard's new mascots begins tomorrow and lasts until Friday of this week. Hall is in a similar position, and we're ready to go forward with ideas and such that the school design groups are developing for that, and hope to have then a presentation for you on schedule, as we talked about at the next meeting. And finally, but certainly not least, the mom of 2 students at Conard, Lakpa Sherpa, reached the summit of Mount Everest for the 10th time last week on Wednesday morning, making her the first woman to do so. And if you get a chance to check out Conard's webpage as well as the Instagram, there's a wonderful picture of the Conard flag being hoisted on the top of Mount Everest, which is pretty cool. So that's what I have for this evening to share. Any questions?
Thank you. Any
All right.
questions regarding what was shared this evening? All right, thank you so much. Now moving on to staff reports and board discussions, where we will receive our update on the elementary social emotional learning SEL civics curriculum. So we certainly welcome to the table Mr. Vicinis, Dr. Haskins, and Ms. Carrie Jones. And we'll pass it over to you three.
Well, good evening, and thank you very much for this opportunity to present again. I'm Dr. Haskins, I'm losing. I want to say this is our 4th presentation. I know we had a quick update on curriculum in general on September 9th at our opening report, but really our first presentation in earnest was in October, I believe October the 19th, and I believe we had an informal update at one point. I couldn't find the date. December, where we came to the board, and it is honestly a privilege to be able to provide additional information and update, and to really narrow our focus. And I want to begin by just apologizing for really having our backs to the crowd. I know this is a presentation to our Board of Ed, but I know that there's been really a lot of civic engagement in and around our SEL curriculum specific to our gender identity lesson within that curriculum. And so this presentation is as much for you as a board, our listening audience at home, and folks in our arena. I also know, and I'm pleased to be joined at the table by my colleagues, Carrie Jones, our Director of Elementary Education, and Dr. Rosina Haskins, our Director of Equity Advancement. Dr. Haskins has had the privilege to report to you many times on the SEL curriculum at large, and I really wanted the opportunity to be able to lead some conversation and talk about this through a curricular lens, and hopefully to be able to provide some clarifications out there that really seem to be some persistent misunderstandings, even from some of the comments that I heard this evening in our public comment. So an overview of what we intend. I'll talk generally about the larger social emotional curriculum and give some background for it, but I really want to very quickly zoom in on what seems to be the area of specific interest from our public and from some of our parent community in and around gender identity, to be able to talk about what it is and what it isn't that we're teaching. Not really here to talk specifically about what gender identity is and what gender identity is not, nor is that really a significant component of our curriculum. So I definitely want to try to help clarify that persistent misunderstanding, but to really talk about what is included in our lesson on gender identity versus what is not. To talk about the review process, I know that we've spoken in the past about different input channels, but I do want to make sure that folks have an appreciation and an understanding of changes to our curriculum and how the process of review is something that has vitality, something that has life. And then I'm going to turn it over and ask Dr. Haskins and Ms. Jones to talk about our parent communication and education efforts, because that's also something that we realize throughout this process that there's a greater need for and an area where we can provide more effort and more emphasis. The last thing before I transition, I do want to just highlight the graphic on the slide. It's there to represent kind of a model for our work and curriculum in general, and looking at our focus and our commitment to equity as at the intersection not only of everything that we do with high quality instruction, high quality pedagogy, certainly our efforts to round out our education with children relative to their social emotional learning, their character development, their development as good citizens, our work with cultural competence to recognize and respect the great diversity that we have here in the district, and then certainly our commitment to family partnerships. And we see equity as something that lives at the intersection of all of those things. So it's an important graphic for us to think about as we go through. The first thing that I want to mention, and this slide, really the next set of three graphics, will demonstrate the overlap from the national level to the state level to the local level in terms of social emotional learning. And it's important to kind of mention, because that seems to be a question in terms of is SEL in any way, shape, or form kind of overcrowding our curriculum? Is it in any way, shape, or form impacting the quality of our education, our ability to help students with their mathematics, with their literacy, with their social studies? SEL has always been a part of our curriculum. It's always been a component, although perhaps it's lived under different names. Certainly SEL is a piece, and when you unpack what it is, as is demonstrated here in this national model for SEL as put forward by the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Social Emotional Learning, or otherwise known as CASEL, it's lived under names such as character development. It's lived under names to include civics, and it really looks at all of these components and what's it's lived in our report card indicators for a long time, just in terms of how students treat each other, as well as some of their work habits. But what's important is that given the pandemic, we've recognized and all of the isolation that we've had over the last couple of years, behavioral health in general and social emotional learning specifically, the ability for relationship skills, the ability for self-management, some of these other components have taken on greater weight. And it's the state of Connecticut that has, number one, adopted the Castle model and integrated it within their own framework for what they're calling not only social emotional but also intellectual habits. The state of Connecticut put greater weight upon social emotional learning and charged us with schools to ensure that we had greater weight within it, within our curriculum, and its integration throughout different components and different subject areas. It bears mentioning the definition, should there be any doubt. So obviously we're from Connecticut. We adopt what the Connecticut State Department of Education has done to define social emotional learning, specific as the process by which children, specifically, achieve emotional intelligence through competencies of self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. Now, as a district, we have taken that, paid close attention to that definition and to both the Castle model and the Connecticut model, and we've developed a framework that we can use that really centers in and around the 4 domains that you see there. And those 4 domains, within those 4 domains, we embed skills, we embed direct instruction and lessons, and resources to support the development of a positive self-concept, the identification, understanding, and regulation of your own emotions, and the identification and understanding of the emotions of others, the development and understanding of rules and responsibilities within diverse communities, and that's really where we see the very specific tie-in to our civics instruction, and the development of positive interpersonal relationships. And for us, really, it's the connection between interpersonal skills, emotional intelligence, roles and responsibility as a member of the community that grounds this work for us within our civics. And it's probably the most important sort of first opportunity to identify the charge within our social emotional curriculum is that of these domains, is that of the development of the positive concept and the relationship skills. It is not an investigation into certainly growth hormones or the differences between your gender identity or anatomy. These are not the concepts that live within our elementary curriculum. So while I might certainly understand some concerns, some debate, some questions about developmental appropriateness, were that our curriculum, I want to be able to really kind of talk about what it is that we are teaching. And the bulk of what we teach comes from a core resource called Second Step. Second Step has been in this district, Carrie, for any number of years, well over 10 years. And historically, it wasn't the sole curriculum. Historically, our social emotional curriculum was not as uniform as we have tried to make it, given this emphasis with the state of Connecticut. We've had a number of different programs that have been introduced, many of which we still use in the district, but not necessarily as our guiding resource, which Second Step now is. Some of these, just to reference them, so folks may have heard them before, we've used PBIS to support social emotional learning. We've used Responsive Classroom. We've used CPS, or the Ross Green model. We've also used the Yale University work with the mood meter and ruler, but we've used Second Step, and Second Step has historically always had a presence in some of our curriculum because of the quality of the materials and the comprehensive nature of it. So in general, there are, I would ballpark between 50 and 75 grade lessons associated with 4 major themed units. The themes of the units are common across the grades. The lessons themselves are developmentally appropriate based on their grade level, and that represents the bulk of the curriculum. But we've also integrated that curriculum with our ongoing work as it relates to cultural competence and specifically social justice. In the last several years, we've made a real commitment to having more assured learning experiences in and around cultural competence, and we've developed a social justice curriculum that's built on standards. It is framed around these 4 concepts of identity, diversity, justice, and action. And it is the identity theme in which our gender identity lives, not as the singular element, but as one of several that we'll talk about. So in essence, we supplement our second step resource materials with lessons that we've designed, aligned to these social justice standards. It provides the framework for us as a district for teaching about culture and for teaching about equity. And I think it bears mentioning the importance of the mentor texts that we've selected. What you see on the screen are the texts related, I believe, to grade 1 under this social justice heading that address each of these 4 domains of equity instruction. The mentor texts play a specific role because what we don't want, given all of our diversity, we recognize we have a significant amount of diversity. We don't necessarily always have a great a uniform distribution of that diversity in a classroom. So we don't ever want to place a singular student or a small number of students as bearing the weight of representation of whatever that might be, whether that's representation of their race, their ethnicity, their religion, their politic, their gender identity, their family structure, whatever it might be. It's important for us, we feel, to have texts that not only provide that anonymous, that neutral kind of a third-party character who can represent the lesson that we're after, but it also provides for our educators a framework, a guide, a kind of a set of goalposts in terms of, all right, this is the lane that we want you to drive in. We're not looking for you to necessarily go beyond our intended learning objectives. So within that, as we've said, the theme of identity, one of the 4 domains of those social justice standards, it's a very wide theme. It encompasses all of these different components. We have lessons across our grades that attempt to reflect the variety of characteristics that formulate an individual's identity that vary for all of us. But we recognize that gender is the one kind of that's getting a lot of the attention. So within this larger SEL curriculum, within its 4 domains of self and social awareness, skills for developing a positive self-concept, skills for developing positive interpersonal skills, narrowing that to identity, and within identity, speaking specifically of gender, for which we have developed a total of 2 lessons. And the outcomes, the learning outcomes for those 2 lessons are written here again with the very real hope for clarity around what we're after. We are after our students to be able to identify examples of gender stereotypes so that to not fall victim to gender stereotypes. We are also after students to have comfort in expressing who they are as persons, regardless of which domain we're talking about, but certainly under gender identity, and to be able to show respect for others. We are not looking for much beyond that in terms of being able to dissect it, being able to debate it in terms of social morals, looking at different scientific arguments, looking at neuroscience. None of that obviously lives within our elementary curriculum. But it bears some mention in terms of how this is all grounded. So to appreciate the learning goals that we have, I want to reference this excerpt of a graphic from our State of Connecticut grades K through 3 social, emotional, and intellectual habits. So what the State of Connecticut has done is they've taken learning standards that actually exist within the pre-K curriculum, within the pre-K standards, the early learning standards, and they've provided a progression for those learning standards through grade 3. And if I look specifically, say, toward the middle of that, where there's an expectation for students, and I'll use second grade, to see themselves as valuable contributing members of their family, of their school, of their community group. That's this concept, this positive self-concept, to recognize their personal strengths, their personal challenges and limitations, to be able to be comfortable describing aspects of themselves. I contrast that with statistics, very real statistics that we have in research regarding some of the obstacles for our students who identify either as transgender, as non-binary, or as what we may refer to as gender non-conforming. Based on a CDC study there, you see it. 27% of students nationally feel unsafe at school. More than a quarter of the students in this population. 35% report being bullied. 1 out of every 3, more than. Over half report feelings of loss and hopelessness. And 35% report not suicidal ideations, not contemplating, actual attempts of suicide. So what we have are statistics that are very at odds with each other in terms of the goal for really that self-awareness and that positive self-image. And it's important to note that the incidence rate nationally for students who are transgender or gender nonconforming is approximately 2%, according to recent studies. It's further important to notice that as recently as 2018, West Hartford conducts a youth at risk survey every 2 or 3 years, where we look at our supports that we have for children and our curricular program. And our incidence rate among our high school students is equivalently about 2%. So, other research talks about the stability of gender identity. And so we recognize and we know from example, from our families, from a student I met this evening upstairs on the 4th floor, that we do in fact have students that are gender nonconforming or gender questioning, and they are questioning at an early age. And our job with that is nothing more than to help them to have this positive self-concept, to help them feel respected and feel welcomed and ultimately feel safe in the school. It's the concern, I listen attentively to what folks are saying when whether through communication with my office or with Dr. Haskins through email or at the podium. And these are some general themes of messages that I've heard. People claim that our students are too young to understand the topic of gender itself. And mind you, I said, gender was the quote that I heard because, again, there's gender identity. That these lessons are going to create gender confusion among students, misidentification, the leading to a change of sex. I think I heard that as recently as moments ago. And that gender identity itself is this whole concept is biased. It's in conflict with basic math and science. So these are some of the things that I know people have concerns about, and I don't want to minimize those concerns, but I want to provide what we're relying on relative to the research that we've done and our approach. And first and foremost is a quote from the American Pediatric Association that we recognize and we know developmentally, in fact it's written right into our early learning standards, that children are aware of the physical differences between boys and girls as early as age 2. And they have a stable sense of their own gender identity. They see themselves as male, female, or they potentially may see themselves as not certain, or most students, by the age of 4. That information comes from the American Pediatric Association. And it really speaks to the notion that the inclusion of gender as an attribute of your identity and our desire to talk about, it's, when children are young, they recognize the differences even in play as to what boys might play with versus what girls might play with. And there are those students, while it's possible, in fact, I think it speaks to this to try to debunk this question about confusion, that while students will identify that, and they may be influenced to exposure of stereotypes in terms of play or in terms of sense of dress between being a boy or a girl, their own innate sense of self cannot be changed. And that's a statement, again, from the American Pediatric Association. There was a different quote that I was referencing from an article, I believe in Psychology Today, that talked about the stability of a student's gender identity based on studies, that it is not rapidly changing, nor is it necessarily being influenced by the occasion of a character in a singular text or lesson. The last question that was on the screen, the question really that seems to be wondering about what it is that we're teaching, and is what we're teaching in conflict with science? Is it in conflict with anatomy? First off, SEL as a concept is not in conflict with math nor science, and it's the SEL curriculum. We don't tease out the differences, and we could clearly have a really fruitful and engaging conversation as a board, as a public forum, with this concept of what gender identity is and gender expression and the differences from anatomy. But these are not conversations that we're entertaining in our elementary setting. They're simply not. What we're talking about, they do live. There is a standard within our health curriculum. And I know that's where some folks have talked about, why are you placing this in civics versus health? There's a standard within our health curriculum where there's an expectation you do speak to what's the difference between your physical anatomy, your gender identity, your gender expression, and then on a whole separate topic, whole different island, your sexual orientation and who you prefer, who you're attracted to. That lives within the health curriculum. That is introduced as early as grade 6, aligned with our Connecticut State Department of Education standards. It is certainly something that that parents have the opportunity to voice a desire to opt out of. But what we're talking about within our SEL curriculum, and this is important, is teaching students to be confident in their self-expression, teaching students to respect others in their own self-expression. And it's an important note that research, and that's not something, number one, I don't want any student to ever be confused about how to treat someone else. I don't think that our curriculum creates confusion in and around that. And it's important to note that research has shown, and this was research that was, to be honest and transparent, but primarily based on racial bias. But I think I will go out on a limb and say that I would expect that it extends to gender identity. Research has shown that children develop bias based on both exposure and lack of exposure to diversity. And so we know that within our own experience, we know that within our own curriculum, and perhaps within our own upbringing, that when we don't have the ability to demonstrate the wide variety of differences between us, we automatically can develop that bias. And research shows that by age 4, that bias is present in children, and by age 12, some students can be particularly set in their thinking. But research has also shown that through exposure and really just through an appreciation of difference, that students can even unlearn that bias if they have gained it. And really that's our goal with this, is that we've developed a curriculum that's intended to support awareness and appreciation of the diversity that exists here within our community. And our curriculum is, has its own vitality, has its own life to it. There's been questions that have come forward to us from the public, what's the opportunity, or I would ask the board to consider how, review of this curriculum. So I want to talk about, first and foremost, talk about our broad structures for review, which do exist, and this curriculum certainly would be a part of that. We do have what's called a 5-year curriculum review process in general, where every curriculum, regardless of the last time that it's shelf life, goes through a thorough and formal review. But new curriculum, such as our social justice, our identity curriculum specifically, has had ongoing review since it's in its infancy. We've done a review of all of our lessons. The 3 of us have sat down and looked them over in light of questions that have come forward, in light of conversations that we've had with parents, to ensure that the material that we've put out to our teachers very specifically identifies the learning goals that we're after, gives them some left and right kind of limits as to what our intended objectives are. We've reviewed very thoroughly resources related specifically to gender identity. We've read every book. We've read them against statements that we've made publicly in terms of what we intend for our curriculum and where we intend that curriculum to kind of end, and what conversations were more appropriate at home. And in response to that review, we have identified some books that you say, you know what? You're right, that book, probably it's not a bad book, but it goes beyond our intended learning objective, and we've replaced those materials. So we've reshuffled others to place them into more developmentally appropriate grade bands. And we have ongoing review. It didn't stop this year. It didn't stop in December. We know that there's books that folks have said they're not satisfied with. They had questions about. We've reread those since. And while I would feel comfortable today telling you that there's no text that we have in our set of mentor texts that are up on our website that I am uncomfortable with at all, there are 1 or 2 where, hey, if I found a better resource at some point in time, I might replace it, but not because what we have is in any way, shape, or form inappropriate. Simply perhaps out of respect for some questions that have come up and ease with navigating that in a classroom setting should it become problematic. All right. At the end of the day, our process that we're engaged in this gender identity lesson that we have has been very well informed, not only from research but from input from our community, from feedback from our parents, our educators, and our instructional leaders. And so we will continue with that, but the other thing that we do hope to continue with is dialogue, because the dialogue that we've been able to have in small groups and one-on-one with parents has certainly been the most fruitful, the most positive in terms of being able to really get at the root concerns and ask questions and dig deeper. So I'm going to turn it over at this point to my colleague, Dr. Haskins. But one thing, forgot my little graphic here. I wanted to mention this one piece. This is something that I jotted down that I heard in discussion 2 weeks ago at our last board meeting. And the context of the comment really is in and around the school mascots issue, but the statement was, if students, and this is my paraphrasing, so I apologize, but if students have this negative connotation regarding themselves as individuals, regarding their school, regarding their own identity, based on the name, I think it was chieftain or warrior, then we've failed to educate them, and that's there's an absolute validity in that criticism, an absolute validity that our intentions are never for students to feel any sense of anything other than affirmation about who they are as individuals. I would want that same sentiment to be applicable to a child's gender identity, to their race, to their family structure, to their religion. I would never want anything that we're doing or not doing as a public institution to cause a child to not feel valued by their school system. And I think it's kind of around those topics that we can have greater public conversations. So I will turn it over now to Dr. Haskins.
Good evening. There really isn't much more that needs to be added. Paul's presentation was very comprehensive and succinct, and as I sit and listen to him frame out our goals and our aims, I think, this quote that you ended with, or paraphrasing of a statement from previously, that resonates with me, because we truly want all children to feel safe and bring in their full, authentic selves to school. And, we really just want, Carrie and I, we just really want to close out this part of the presentation by highlighting communication efforts and opportunities for two-way dialogue, two-way learning opportunities as a community together. And so we think it's important first to underscore the value of school and family partnership. As you saw on the opening slide, the visual in the opening slide, family-school partnership, it is an essential component of our equity model. Over the past 2 years, we've deepened our efforts to foster the values of kindness, respect, and personal self-concept. And so in doing so, we have invited diverse perspectives, lived experiences, backgrounds, and voices of our families, and we've sought to translate that feedback, as well as the feedback of our educators and our students, into our ongoing curriculum review and revision. Not just the content, not just the what we teach, but how we teach. And so much of the response to feedback or inquiries or concerns that have been raised, including those that we've heard here during public comments, they are reflected in some of the key shifts that we've made this year in the fall and in the early winter. And those include our communication channels, having more information on our website and making sure that it's accessible, our school and classroom newsletters that highlight some of the topics that are coming, and even our selection of resources, as Paul talked about. We have truly honored all of our stakeholders' requests for individual and small group live discussions, lesson walkthroughs, review of our resources and mentor texts, walking through companions that go with them, and we have provided every single email, we've provided comprehensive responses, almost like a board report response, to every inquiry, including those of support. And so we do recognize it hasn't been enough. There's so much more that we can continue to do to strengthen our school and family communication and transparency. We've seen a surge of what I call climate emergencies and horrific events, sadly, as recent as this past weekend in Buffalo, and they signal an urgent need for stronger school and family partnerships, those that are built on trust, civility, and mutual respect. So it is what research tells us. We've got lots of decades of research on family-school partnerships, and they tell us the benefits and how it benefits our children enormously. And it's essentially what our children deserve. They need to see us united, not divided. And so my colleague Carrie, she's going to talk about future school-based structures and inclusive, what we call dual capacity partnership opportunities linked to learning more about our SEL civics curriculum.
Thanks, Rosina. So we recognize there are a variety of needs among the families and caregivers in our district. Some families may be looking to understand the why, to understand the larger context of these identity lessons and what social emotional learning is about. We understand that some families may be seeking clarification specifically on this one lesson on gender stereotype or gender identity, and others may be looking for specific information on supporting their children at home. You know, their child may be coming home and having this conversation, and how do I support that conversation? And so to address those various needs, we're looking to the successful models of several of our schools who've had these conversations with their families on social emotional learning in general, and more specifically on gender literacy. And so based on those models, we are planning to host school-based workshops specific to gender identity in the late fall and early winter of next year. Following our kind of broad-based curriculum nights, we really want teachers to focus on all of their academic areas at our early meetings and really be able to have a later in the fall, early winter, specific workshops for parents of and caregivers of elementary children at their schools where they have those relationships of trust with school staff, as well as with our support. And those school-based workshops for families will address 3 key areas in response to questions and concerns that we've heard. To share those 3 lesson targets, as we heard from Paul tonight, to model lessons and resources, and to offer the opportunities for questions and answers. While the workshops are still being planned, obviously we're speaking to the principals who've led some of these workshops, and we want to have their collaboration and have some specific design relative to their communities. We would anticipate that parents, families, and caregivers would experience a lesson themselves, that they'd have opportunity to read the mentor text related to that one gender stereotype and one gender literacy lesson relative to their children at their grade level or across the grade level, so those texts would be widely available, and to ask clarifying questions, to have that dialogue. As was shared this evening, we're hoping that hosting these workshops at school sites will bring clarity, will bring understanding, and will bring trust among our educators and family and caregivers about exactly what these gender identity lessons are about, what they are, and what they're not. And we look forward to having that dialogue in a way that, as we said, will foster that sense of hope and optimism and inclusivity that is characteristic and for which we feel responsible as a school district. Details on those workshops will be forthcoming through school newsletters later in the fall. So thank you for the opportunity to share this evening.
And so with that, I would really love to open it up to any questions, any discussion from the board.
Thank you so very much. Thank you. Teammates, questions? Gail.
Thank you very much. It was a very nice presentation. I have a few different questions, but I'm going to start with one question. I totally understand, the whole concept of trying to teach children empathy, kindness, good behaviors that we want all of our children to emulate. But my question is, why did you pick gender identity specifically? The population of people who identify as transgender in the United States is exceedingly small. And I'm sure that if you were to do a survey of the students in a particular classroom, that there would most likely, I haven't done the survey, but I would assume that there would be more children in that classroom that come from families where there may be problems such as drug abuse, alcoholism, divorce, disability. And yet, when you showed your list of books up there, I think you said it was the first grade, none of those books had anything to do with any of the things that are probably much more likely to be found in the classroom than transgender. And I understand the idea of, which I know is a concept that's been raised, that we want the child to see themselves in the classroom. But I think children can see themselves in a classroom in many different ways and not only by their gender. So a child has many facets and they can see themselves in many different ways. So my question is, why did you pick this in particular as opposed to all the other things?
Sure. No, fair question, and I appreciate it. So the thing that I didn't show, as I referenced on the slide with the second step materials, there are, in the neighborhood of 50 to 75 additional lessons. Those lessons, not necessarily drug abuse at the elementary level, but as those needs pop up, we certainly address that, through our clinicians and such. But the whole variety of other issues and the comprehensive nature of social emotional learning is typically been addressed through the SEL curriculum that exists within the Second Step program, and it has to do with the kind of the fluid nature of how the SEL curriculum is structured. That teachers, given any particular need, perhaps loss that might exist within a family and bereavement, the teacher can find an appropriate resource and bring that right out. So I certainly wouldn't want you to think that those materials don't exist. The why of the inclusion, which is also a fair question of gender identity, really has to do based on need. Over the prior to the writing of the lessons, and really, you roll it back, we started with a singular text. Prior to that, identification of that singular text was the call from parents in our elementary schools, in elementary classrooms, asking for help, asking for support, indicating that their child perhaps was planning to come to school wearing gender nonconforming clothing. And they were very, very concerned over how their child would be received. They were very concerned. I mean, the families understand the statistics regarding bullying. The families understand other students who may not, necessarily recognize if the child chooses to change how they're called by name. And things of this nature. So it was from that need, and at first it came up in one school, and then there was a second, and then there was a third. And then we realized that this is bigger than an isolated incident. This is not a significant number. It's 2%, but it's significant enough. One child makes the difference. And so from that, we had started with an approach initially where when we only knew of a student here or a student there, with kind of an intervention approach that we would work within that classroom, within that grade level, within that school. But as the incidence of students became more commonplace, we recognized that we had a larger need, and we also recognized we didn't know what we didn't know. We didn't know how many students might not be necessarily coming forward. And again, our goal with this wasn't to create necessarily like an emphasis or an awareness on gender identity solely. It was really to recognize and acknowledge that there are those students that have different, in the same way that we teach, there are different family traditions. There are families that have different structures. There are individuals that might look different from us, might have different culture, different language, different appearance. That this was just another difference that exists within identity, but we're all still the same people that we were yesterday. We're all still friends on the playground, kind of a thing. So as we sought to have some form of a lesson or a resource to support teachers with this concept, we identified a text, but we had a one-size-fits-all approach, and we got plenty of feedback from our teachers. Hey, this doesn't work. This is great for the 5th grade classroom, but I've got this need in my 3rd grade classroom. I've got this need in a 2nd grade class. So we went back to the table. We tried to identify developmentally appropriate texts and lessons that would align with them. And again, with that concept of the mentor text, so that, as I mentioned, in the kind of an intervention approach, what happens is that singular student now bears the weight of this lesson, of this identification, of this classification for the entire class and potentially for their school. That's one of the reasons why students are depressed. They don't talk about it. They don't bring it up. It's very isolating. We wanted to figure out a way that we could not position the student And so that's where we came upon the concept and the variety of identities so that it wasn't singling out one thing, and a series of mentor texts that touch on all the different facets and all the different components of identity, so that it's not teaching about transgender, it's not teaching about divorced parents, it's not teaching about Asian Americans or African Americans. It's teaching about the many different facets of identity, and students have exposure to many different types without necessarily needing to go into depth, because the whole premise of the lesson is in and around acceptance.
Ari. I just wanted to follow up because I just feel like that comment could be somewhat misleading. I was wondering if you could go back to the pie chart with the identity components, because I just want to point out that what you're telling us is that in SEL, when you're talking about identity, it isn't just gender identity that we're discussing. We're discussing religion, we're discussing different family structures, different race and ethnicity, different cultures. So this SEL is not purely defined by gender identity. It's part of somebody's potential identity, and we're just addressing that in addition to religion, to culture, to socioeconomic status. I just felt this isn't just about gender identity, and that's not the only focus of our SEL when we talk about identity. I just wanted to clarify that.
100%, and I know these two professionals can talk specifically to this. The gender identity is a singular lesson. There are 4 to 5 lessons in and around identity itself. The one that there is one that we lead with generally that's always in common regarding name, and I don't know if you guys want to say any more, but you're absolutely right that within the concept of gender, there's a gender identity sort of a feature, and that might be just something gender nonconforming, and then there is also a second lesson in and around gender stereotype, but then there are other lessons that touch on these.
And I just want to reinforce the notion that our social studies standards for our state, civics is one of the components of this. So while I know there have been some comments and questions about why this is not under health curriculum, understanding one's identity and others' identities and differences and having respect for that is part of developing citizenship and becoming part of making decisions and understanding each other. So it is about kindness and compassion, but it also builds on that from an early age in our pre-K learning standards toward our civics curriculum in our secondary level, really understanding what it means, the foundations of citizenship. So it's really building in, this is a building block toward that as well. So that foundation of decision-making and really our democratic principles.
I just want to make a distinction between identity and circumstances. Children, nor any of us, we are not, whether it's domestic violence, substance use, that does not define who we are. It certainly is what we have to overcome, but I just don't want to conflate that with who we are in terms of identity.
And can I just follow up? Sorry. I just wanted to make a comment. I think that the presentation this evening provided really comprehensive insight into what the curriculum looks like. I think the data speaks for itself. Just the data that you presented, Paul, about what the statistics are for those students who maybe express themselves in a non-gender conforming way, what the impact of that is if it isn't kind of accepted from an early age. I will just share, without breaking any confidentiality, that there are students in our district who are suffering and experiencing suicidality, depression, all of these things. And I often wonder, for some of these older teens, if we had had this curriculum when they started our district in kindergarten, would they still be experiencing the level of distress and suicidality and mental health issues that they're currently expressing? So I just want to thank you for incorporating this into our district, because I think you're saving lives at the end of the day.
Thank you. Ethan?
Yeah, not sure how to follow that. But my question is, or when I read this, my reading was, okay, it's good to talk about shared mission, talking about shared values, talking about involving families. My problem, and I believe in this town, and I believe just throughout the country, everybody wants what's best for the kids. How they get there is a different question, but so I'm going in with that intent. When I listen to, because my kids are out of the school system, but when I listen to people come up here during open communication, people send their emails or conversations, there's not that feeling of shared mission, and my question is, how do we get there? And I think the best thing that you've said to me, and I wish you would emphasize it more, is here's where we heard you, and here's where we changed, and here's the books. Because that says we're listening. And I think it's very important to get everybody behind the basic concept. Not everybody's going to agree with it, but at least it shows that we'll make adjustments. And that was, I think, when we were talking about can we get families involved or just hear them, small groups, not big groups. But, and one of the fears I had when I read this is family workshop. Well, a workshop's great if we're going to listen to you and we're going to work with you, or we're going to talk to you. And I know you're going in with the intent of working with people and you want to hear them, but you know as well as I do, a lot of times people just, they're looking for the first instance of there's a wall here, or they really don't want to hear from me. And I don't know how to tell you to do it other than the one, and frankly, for me, from a management perspective, the most effective thing I ever did was compliment people when they proved me wrong, who worked for me, and say, look, I screwed up, whoever did something here, and they showed me I was wrong. But I think that's really important, and I don't know how else to convey it, but the more you listen, because we want everybody behind the whole thing. So anyways, that was
I want to thank you, number one, and I want to agree with you. I would hope that the concept of what we have heard and what we have learned from parents had come through, and if it hasn't, I certainly want to emphasize that again in our review process, where we talked about in terms of we got some really good critical feedback that said, you've identified what your learning goals are, and I just feel like this text, this resource, extends beyond it. And that was where we did make those changes. But I wanted to mention that in general, in every conversation that we've had, when we go back over these goals that are on the screen, they've had resounding agreement from anyone, whether they're opposed, theoretically opposed or theoretically in support. The area, and I'll apologize if that was my main emphasis, the area where folks seem to get tripped up and seem to create the habit is in the perception, I believe, of what we're teaching. And I'll just take it out of potentially what might be the hot button, and I'm just looking at family structure in the right corner here. Family structure. If, as an adult, if I assume, okay, so in this concept of identity, they're going to teach about family structure, and I think of it as an adult, and I think of it perhaps as a fairly academic setting, and I can picture, a 5-question define, nuclear family, define single parent, define divorce, define remarried, define same-sex marriage, define, is like, that's not what the instruction is. It's really a lesson that is in and around exposure. So you're reading a story, and there might be 2 families that are highlighted in the story, and the 2 families, you see the characters, and there's the mom and the dad, and they're making breakfast over here, and in this other one, it's the grandmother that's doing what have you with the child who raises it. And at the end of the day, you're talking about in the lesson the things that the students did in common, the things that might have been unique or special in terms of what the family was doing. And so the students have been exposed to the different family structures, but it's not direct instruction. Take that same concept it's applied in this question of gender identity to an exposure. It is not an academic discussion with children around definitions of terms and so on. And that seems to lead to what I perceive as a lot of the confusion and concern, so that when we've had these conversations with parents, generally speaking, everyone will tell me they absolutely believe we have a wonderful community in which we live. Everyone will talk about the fact that they support an inclusive treatment. They support respect for others. And where we have had either resources, generally it's been resources that have perhaps gone beyond what we're targeting in the instruction, we've received that feedback. We've thought it through. And as I did mention, there are some current questions that are coming up about a particular text, say, and we've gone back and we've reread it because I take that feedback seriously. I do want to be able to listen and let folks know that they've been heard. And it is exactly why, as Carrie mentioned, we want to have more of these opportunities, because I can't get that same understanding from an email, nor from notes I might jot based on what someone said without the opportunity to probe deeper. And so those have been the conversations, and Rosina talked about those that we've had that have been very, very fruitful, very, very helpful for us. And at the end of the day, there might have been parts of the conversation that we decided to leave in some disagreement about how we felt.
Yeah.
We did have that honest exchange with those individuals and with those families, and it was really beneficial.
I don't think you're going to make everybody happy, but at least that they were heard. And perception does become reality, unfortunately. And so it's their perception, not yours.
And I think hence the smaller, more intimate school-based conversations, I think, will be really critical to this.
I think that'd be great.
Other questions? Let me see if something, I'll come back to you, Gail. Claire, yes.
So thank you very much for the presentation. And I do appreciate the listening, the adapting, and teachers in general are reflective. Every time they teach every new class, you change. And so with this curriculum, you need to adjust. There definitely, I think, was some fear in the community, and there still is fear. And through the school itself, the individuals that you know, the family connections that a school has, I think is a great place to have these conversations and to have people be able to voice their concern, but also to try to understand more. The fact that everyone who asked for a meeting got a meeting, you responded to the emails you did receive. But still, if there's a misconception of what you're teaching, you say perception's reality, but if perception is faulty, it's not really reality. Reality is when you clarify, is my perception correct or not? And so if you perceive something, educating, talking to the teachers, being part of the community, I think people can get informed. I was kind of surprised at some of the books that were recommended to be banned. And so I purchased them so I could read them and read them with myself and with children. And one was about a teddy bear who, instead of wanting to wear the bow tie around his neck, wanted it in the hair. And there was no mention of any body parts. In fifth grade is where I taught for 13 years and brought up body parts. And it wasn't the puberty lessons in fifth grade. I can count on a hand the 5 or 6 families that said, we don't want to be a part of this. Very few families opted out of puberty education, but that was the year that we would talk about it. But it wasn't about relationships. It was about changes within your own body. And the same with the community officers who come in 5th grade to talk about drugs and cigarettes and alcohol, because these things are brought in at the developmentally right year. I found the books that I read not inappropriate, and I didn't see anything about them that talked about, sex or organs or anything that people are afraid that they are talking about that. So I'm glad you're continuing to look at what you have and reevaluate or even add new text as they come out. But it is real. I work with children that are, dealing with these issues, and their friends are understanding. And the kids see people in grocery lines. And even our Assistant Secretary of Health just won Woman of the Year with USA. And she's an admiral and is transgender. And kids see these things on television, they see them in the world, and it's important for them to kind of understand. And I'm glad that you're doing it.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the research, and I know you had sent a couple of articles in the report. So one of the articles that you actually put in the report, called Mental Health of Transgender Children Who Are Supported in Their Identities, actually showed in their conclusions that children who are socially transgendered compared to a peer group really did not have any increased levels of depression and very slight increased levels of anxiety. So, and this is only looking at elementary school. The second article that you yourself just in your presentation had referenced on I think Psychology Today, was looking more at children who had transgendered and then looking at the stability of that over 5 years, meaning whether they were looking to go back to their original gender. I did a search myself on research that's out there about what is the implications of potentially teaching this in the elementary school, if there are any long-term studies, and I could not find really anything out there that is specifically talking about teaching children about transgender identity in the elementary school and what is the outcome of that. So I don't think, and I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I do not believe that there is any research out there that would be considered long-term studies, peer-reviewed, in the elementary school that shows that teaching this type of material or exposing children to this type of material has either a negative or a positive effect. So therefore, I have a problem with essentially introducing this type of material to children that are very young in the elementary school without some type of scientific research that backs it up. And I really don't believe it's out there. I don't think that you had it in your, I don't think you gave it to us in the report. I know there's a lot of studies here, but they don't specifically address that. And the one study, which is the mental health of transgender children, actually found that there was no differences in depression in elementary school children who were socially transgendered, and very slight changes in anxiety levels. Now, so I know you had the CDC 2019 report in your presentation, but I don't believe that that really relates to elementary school children.
No, thank you. So if I'm remembering you asked a lot of different things there. So the one about the 5-year study, that was really more intended to be in response to a concern that I heard at the previous meeting that had to do with rapid onset gender dysphoria. And there were a couple of studies that we had seen that, mind you, they weren't necessarily longitudinal, they were 5-year studies, because a lot of this stuff is really just currently understudy. I mean, if you really, if our goal was to get into a lot of education and public discussion in and around the question of gender identity itself, its history, all the different terminology that's associated with it, to include, gender dysphoria and the debates that live within there. Is that a positive connotation term, a negative connotation? None of these things are things that technically exist within our curriculum. None of these things are necessarily learning objectives that we have. But there did seem to be some growing fear and some growing, frequency of comment from the public that related to the notion of, if my child contemplates the existence of a person who is gender nonconforming, they may become gender nonconforming. That was Paul's interpretation of what he was hearing of some concerns within our community. And so what I wanted to do in that report was, one of the things is I wanted to be able to provide some feedback to that concern. I know that we had a member of our community who came forward and said that they had experience with that, and had brought that as a concern. I further know that we had a different member of our community, I believe, who self-identified as being in the LGBT community, and said, if heterosexuality were going to influence me, the preponderance of heterosexual cues, have had no impact on my sexuality, and was therefore saying the same ought to apply relative to this. So what I'm trying to respond to is the notion that if there's a character in a book who's in any way, shape, or form gender nonconforming, perhaps Jacob's New Dress, the child isn't identified as transgender or anything else, just someone whose self-expression is such that he prefers to wear a dress or frilly clothing or something of that nature. That doesn't mean if I read that book that I am going to automatically want to do the same. So that is some of the findings that the American Pediatric Society has shared, and there's a quote in the PowerPoint to that. The question about the rapid onset gender dysphoria was addressed in one of those articles, but again, that itself, all of these kinds of research indicators are not to demonstrate a positive impact of this, simply to quell, my hope would be to quell a fear, if that fear existed for any reason. Given that our curriculum is really not about being able to help students identify gender identities, our curriculum is about students being able to demonstrate respect for individuals. I mean, I know that, we've pointed to general research in and around the benefits of social emotional learning, and it really kind of speaks to that. It really speaks to, if you are providing character education, if you are providing students with positive examples of being accepting of differences, that has a positive impact on them. That's the longitudinal research that I can point to, because that's the goal of the curriculum. There is a lot of new research that's starting to come out, because in all honesty, people either haven't really studied transgender historically, or if they have studied it, it's been based on assumptions and models that, quite honestly, are very likely outdated at this point. And it's been conducted during a time when societal norms are such that there is a lot of pressure to withhold information about gender identity. So I do anticipate that, in terms of any questions that individuals might have about the larger concept of gender identity, that there's research that's emerging, and that there's more research to come. But most of that would likely be targeted to any secondary level conversations. Our understanding of a lot of the big questions that were out there with the board and with the public had specifically to do more so with K-3 And that's really been where we were trying to focus it. And so I did try to pull together even some additional, and I could potentially look to have anything that's not already referenced in the board report referenced online, but try to pull together some additional resources that I found after writing the report that might have been beneficial. And the only other thing I was going to say is what I thought I read on one of the research articles, and I'll go back and reread it, was that when students were affirmed in their identity in general, that the anxiety was lessened. They did not have heightened anxiety. And when essentially when the topic is not discussed, when people are not, their identities are not acknowledged, that is when you have a greater preponderance of anxiety and depression. So that's my recollection of what I read, but I will honestly, Gail, I'll have to go back and reread it if I misunderstood.
I follow up with one comment. I mean, I think that, part of my concern is that none of us really do know, because I don't think the research is out there, what is the effect of potentially introducing some of this material to young children. And I mean, I'm just going to read like one line out of one of the books that is, I think you guys are using. So, I am Jazz. Jazz has a girl brain, but a boy body. This is called Transgender. I was born this way. Jazz likes girl clothes and princesses, not trucks. At first, the school wanted to make Jazz use the boys' bathroom and play on boys' sports teams, but it didn't feel normal to me at all. So, I'm also going to read one other quick excerpt from a different book. When you were born, you couldn't tell people how you were or how you felt. They looked at you and they made a guess. Maybe they got it right, maybe they got it wrong. What a baby's body looks like when they were born can be a clue to what the baby's gender will be, but not always. You might feel that your gender changes from day to day or year to year. Your feelings about your gender are real. Now, my concern with that, well, I have a couple of concerns with that, is one is I have delivered 3,000 babies, and I don't feel that I am making a guess when I tell the parents what the gender of that baby is.
That would be the sex of the baby.
And I don't think that there's any evidence or any research out there that supports that type of excerpt from a book. And my concern is that if you read that to a young child, what is that potentially? And I'm not necessarily expecting you to, I'm just saying.
I do want to respond, if I may. And so first, thank you that's one of the books I talked about. I don't know if you have the excerpt on the following page.
I might not have it in here.
All right. That's one of the concerns, and to Ethan's point, it's one of the concerns I've heard in an email before. It's one of the concerns I've talked about with parents in open dialogue. And generally when that, and I'll go back to the Jazz book as well. I believe both of these books, if I have it correct, are situated in the 5th grade. I know they're in the upper grades.
Right.
And the book about the best guess goes on to say and provide, and I don't have it, I can't quote it for you, but it goes on to discuss that and try to provide an explanation that the guess is the idea that when you're born, people are making those decisions based on your physical anatomy. So I don't necessarily, I'm not in love with the best guess, and I'm not in love with the fact that if you take that one quote on that one page on the left-hand side and don't have the quote on the right-hand side, then it is possible to lose context of what's there. And so that was the book specifically that I was saying, if I could find a better book, I would replace that. But I do feel that the whole notion and the whole point of that story, if, when the story is read in its entirety, is able, and with the age of the child, it's developmentally appropriate, that it's going to, the concept's going to carry through, and if there's a simple question that can get answered without going, beyond where we want to go with it. The I Am Jazz book, and both of these books being in that 5th grade level, attend specifically to state guidance that will identify that school districts, teachers specifically, do need to respect the wishes of any child who chooses to change their pronouns and who chooses to use a bathroom that is different from their assigned sex. These are real mandates from the state of Connecticut. They are protections and rights that we have to certainly abide by, and we have procedures for that. But we need to have some education for our students so that doesn't lead to bullying or other issues. And where bullying generally exists, most prevalently in schools, and where sometimes violence and victimization happen, can be in unsupervised areas such as the bathrooms. So your point's very well taken, but there is purposeful choice behind those. Those are books that we've read carefully. And again, that one, I think it feels good to be yourself. That's one that we've read and reread and debated, and each time we get a question on it, we go back and pull it off the shelf and we read it again, and we say, I'm comfortable with the language given the context, but if I could find a better book that delivers that, I would. I would prefer any any shades of question that I have to having a gap when having no resource at this time.
If I may interject, thank you. I'm so glad for the question. And we actually have some of those books here. And just to ensure that we're getting the whole picture of it, do you mind reading the book, please, to us?
Yeah, those 2 pages, I think, would give greater context.
Okay, thank you.
No, it's not that long, but part of it is there's a difference between a baby's sex and a baby's gender. And if you don't understand the difference between a gender and sex, it can cloud a lot of things. So it says here, see, when you were born, you couldn't tell people who you were or how you felt. And the felt, I really want to stress that. They looked at you and made a guess. Maybe they got it right, maybe they got it wrong. What a baby looks like when they're born can be a clue to what the baby's gender will be, but not always. When people guess wrong, it's okay to let them know. Ruthie was 5 when she told her parents, I know you think I'm a boy, but really I feel like a girl. And I just have to say, boys like to wear necklaces to school sometimes. My daughter likes suits and ties. And she was treated with respect. But she could be in another district, and I know some of those districts, and I've heard about some of those places where she would not have been treated well. And I'm glad that my daughter can wear what she wants to wear, and people are not bullying her, but kids are bullied day in and day out when they're different, when they don't fit in, when they're not wearing the right clothes. They are singled out, and they come home crying, and they don't feel like they fit, and they don't belong. And those kind of sad, unhappy children color our classrooms. And as a teacher, I need to make sure that everyone in my class is safe and feels accepted and is comfortable. And if they want to use the boys' bathroom because they identify as a boy, I will support them. And if they want to use a non-gender bathroom, I will support them, because they need to feel safe in my room. They need to feel safe in my school. So sexuality and your anatomical body parts is not gender. And it's a hard concept to learn, and it took me a while to learn it. You know, it wasn't natural. At first, I was very confused. So I'm glad you're having these conversations to help people understand the difference
and find a way to meet their children that are in their classrooms, just like a mom or dad might have to deal with that in their own home, because it's so important to know you're loved and accepted.
Excuse me, I'm going to ask, please, in the audience, please lower your voice. We're here talking about social emotional learning. It's important to demonstrate that in appropriate ways. Thank you.
Lorna, could I just say one more thing? So my concern with this, Paul, is that I don't know, and there's no research to tell me what is the effect of a child reading this. What is the potential effect? And I'm not asking you to try to answer it, because I don't think the research is out there. So this is what I'm concerned about, is that you have young children and their brains are not fully developed, and they're reading that the doctor might make a mistake and you can change your gender from day to day and year to year. And I don't know, and I don't believe anybody else knows exactly how that affects the child. And it has nothing to do with, not being accepting or not making all children feel welcome. But what I'm concerned about is that we all have the same goal here, but I don't think we think we should get there in the same way.
No, I appreciate that, and I can't create, obviously, research that I don't have. I'm going to respectfully say this much. I know that for decades upon decades, we have not provided education and not provided acknowledgement of the existence of transgender individuals. And I do know what the research says about the impact of that. And it is these statistics that are at the bottom of this slide. So I trust me when I say with every respect, I appreciate the notion, but and if we were trying to go far down a path with it, I would very much perhaps have a different stance. But given that we are really our objective with this is that solely of respect, acknowledgement, and respect. I don't think that. I think that we're on the side of improving these numbers, and I don't anticipate that we're going to see a negative impact. And I think some of the emerging research that's coming out is showing positive trends. And I think that it's important. I think you're asking an important question, and I think it's important for schools to maintain that trust with parents. So I think that more research and more information is something that we want to be able to provide, because I don't want that to be a question for anyone. I don't want anyone to have fears about it. So I respect what you're saying, but my fear is that left unattended, this is what research tells us we'll have with those students. So we do have, the book lists are available on our website, and you can pretty much, if you Google the titles, you can get a YouTube reading of any book, so you don't need to purchase them.
And then Ethan. Oh, excuse me, pardon me. Comments are made during the public comments at the beginning of the meeting and at the end. Thank you. Ari?
I did just want to, and I have research, and I'm happy to share with everyone on the board as well as all of you. There have been numerous studies along the lines of the results that you shared there, that a gender nonconforming student is 8 times more likely to attempt suicide than a gender conforming student. There is clear data with regard to that. So I feel like that's our objective, right? To have, and it's related to feeling validated or valued. And to be very honest, in my experience, home is sometimes not that validating space. It's not a safe space for gender nonconforming children and teens. And if we can provide that safe space at school and they can feel validated there, then we're doing our job.
Ethan?
I had a question about the statistics you have here, just trying to understand. You cited 2% transgender as a statistic. My question is that K through, and I'm assuming it's not, but I don't know, so I'm asking the question. K to 12, or is that, I assume it would get higher as you go up in time, or, I mean, I'm wondering, because it's against kindergarten to third grade, and I realize you're.
Yeah, we haven't asked certainly not locally, we haven't done a study to identify our gender identity of our elementary youth, nor do we necessarily plan to.
No.
I would tell you the 2% is a national statistic. I would need to go back to check on the age of that. Generally speaking, though, the research is saying that your gender identity is stable from the time that you essentially establish a gender identity. So I would offer that the national statistic is a fairly stable. I would have to go back to honestly check the records as to when they collected it. I can tell you that our most recent 2018 Youth at Risk survey is given separately to middle school students and to high school students. And the incidence rate for our middle school students that are identifying as transgender is also close to 2%. I think it's like slightly lower. I think it's like 1.8% or something. But that, and that's 6th grade through 8th grade. I haven't teased it out by grade level.
No. I just assumed that it would be higher in the upper, higher grade.
I think that's a common assumption, and I don't have a solid kind of a answer that I can give you on that. But I do feel that people, I think it's a more adult conversation, so people think they come to this. It's a common assumption people make that children come to this later on. I think what some of the research that I've been reading is showing is students come forward later on, but it's not necessarily that they either haven't had questions or haven't felt a certain way. It's just a certain point in their time in their life when they have a relationship with their parents or with their friends that they're more open to talking about it.
And just to follow up just on the numbers, you cited, or on page 4, it talks about one lesson per gender stereotypes and one on gender identity. Is that for each grade, or is that for?
That's for each of our grades in K through 5.
Okay. So there's no, we're going to do more of this as,
when we move,
5th grade I get, but yeah.
Correct. In middle school, it's starting to get, a little bit more technical at that point, and it lives within the health curriculum.
So,
It's not intended to be overly technical, certainly not within the K through 3, which has been kind of the big question, and based on some of the conversation we've seen by 5th grade. In 4th and 5th grade, we do have the added objective that I can use my own preferred pronoun, and I can respect the choices of others for theirs. And again, that's not we're all going to sit around in a room in a circle and we're going to identify our preferred pronouns. It's if someone has a preferred pronoun and they have chosen to use it and they disclose it, we're going to have an upfront lesson. So the first time that happens, that child's not made to feel uncomfortable.
I understand, but I thought you said that was state dictated or mandated.
It is.
So it's,
But it's also, therefore it's a lesson that we provide to ready our kids for.
But I think that reduces some of the turmoil if we say, this is what the state.
I agree, but I
as
think it's
opposed to West
also
Hartford.
just a good thing to do.
I understand, but
Yeah.
they could take some of the fire away.
Anything that has happened in younger grades, in younger classrooms where students have asked for a different pronoun to be used, and we've accommodated with use of some other texts, so. Claire?
So if I understand correctly, there's the time that these lessons come can be fluid, because if a classroom is dealing with an issue on the playground or an issue within the classroom, that lesson can be moved. Any lesson in the SEL can be shifted around to deal with the current conflict or crisis that you're dealing with. Is that true?
Correct.
Jason?
Thank you. Also apologize to my colleagues on the board and the presenters today for being late to the meeting. I wanted to add to our notion of these statistics in a sense, because on the one hand, it could be, we could look at, say, like a 2% kind of number and say these are a very small percentage of the population. But when we look at, the incidence of hate crimes where people are targeted for their identity, the most deadly identity in America is to be a trans person of color. And we're talking thousands of identity-based murders. And so what we see is that even in this very small population, we see them as incredibly vulnerable. And so, if we're looking at how we want to educate, what do we want students to leave our schools with? Having these kinds of competencies, having these kinds of sensibilities, I think is really important in our state. And and while 2% sounds small, that we're still talking about 180 students. That's in our district, right? So so I don't want that number to kind of minimize the sort of significance and the value that I think the direction that we're going. And I think one of the, I try to kind of comprehend, like, what is it that is so troubling about transgender? And I think, for me at least, I've seen some of the discourse and some of the talking points and references seem to revolve around this belief in the link between biological sex and gender identity, and that transgender identity does demonstrate that those two are different pieces of one's identity. And so it is a much, a much deeper kind of, understanding about how identity is formed and the forces which shape us. So I think in the wheel of identity that you showed, there's, I'm really glad to see a whole range of other positions and other things that shape who we are. One lesson I've seen done, I don't know if it's done here, but it starts with a heart, and it says, what makes your heart beat? What are the things that make your that fill your heart? And it has spaces in that drawing to identify different parts of you. And I think the more that we give students the opportunity to understand that about themselves, that it does produce these kinds of outcomes, right? These learning outcomes that you've identified in the slide that you have here. So I think that's incredibly valuable. And the process that you guys are talking about with continuous improvement, I think, is absolutely necessary. And that, for many, many decades, trans identity was persecuted and pathologized. People were imprisoned for it, and so, the fact that we're at a point now where we're asking what is the impact of this, in the research, I think it's really important to understand how slow it is to come to what trans rights activists have been asking for, which is a validation of their identity, and that our academic system, which does conduct research, has to catch up. They are doing that work, and so I do anticipate, more research being done. I hope it's done, and in the fashion that you're pointing to, because the other statistics, the other things that point to how that is impacted, how validation does produce these, mental health results, but also in terms of the SEL framework, that this is actually about helping all students access their education, right? That social emotional learning produces academic outcomes too. So I think that's something I think I wanted to add to the conversation. And it's sort of maybe unrelated, but I'll throw it in there. There's one of the things that the comments that I've heard is that teachers are experimenting on their students, and that they're untrained in this material. But I know that West Hartford has a really robust professional development scheme that is every week, basically, there's professional development in some fashion. Maybe not always on this, but really, is distinctive in its regularity, whereas I know other districts have professional development maybe every other month, or in other sequences that maybe aren't as robust. So I'm wondering if you can speak about teacher preparation and the kind of professional development that you all have been working with the elementary teachers in this area.
Thanks, Jason, for your comments. I also would like to highlight that one of our texts talks about culturally how different cultures see gender differently maybe than we may in American culture, and that historically marginalized groups based on gender identity maybe in other cultures perceived differently. So I think in Native American culture and maybe other cultures around the world may see gender differently than we do, and that's something potentially to expose children to as well over time in an educational system. So thank you for those points. But to professional learning. So in October, our teachers engaged in a professional learning session where they were introduced to this framework and these two lessons and the texts, the original set of texts before they received feedback were revised based on our teacher feedback as well. We gathered feedback from them. And it actually opened with a story of a family who live in Boston and their child. And we positioned it that because not all schools may currently have a student right now who is gender nonconforming or maybe actively transitioning their gender openly. And so we asked them to position themselves as welcoming the family to their school tomorrow. And the impact of that story and thinking about that family coming to their school was profound. Because we have a responsibility and we've taken pride as a school district in truly welcoming all families and all children to this district, regardless of race, religion, and gender identity. So that was a very profound experience, I think, for our staff to really personalize it and think about, wow, this child and their family are coming into our school. How are we going to manage this? And support and welcome, not just manage, but also manage maybe children in the classroom. And so that's why we not only framed around the text, but just in general, how are we going to communicate? How are we going to support our children and other staff in thinking about a family coming into our school district and a child coming into our school district. So being really child-centered about our professional learning was important. And then secondly, looking at our learning targets and really framing our learning targets, how did this fit into that larger SEL framework and civics framework for ourselves, thinking about the texts themselves, getting feedback on our discussion guides that we had prepared. So we really wanted to give teachers the tool, as Claire alluded to, There may have been fear in broaching this topic. I know for many of us, not growing up with thinking about topics of gender identity, not really even understanding it. So even some of the vocabulary work, we did have support from our LGBT Plus Alliance in some of that one-to-one maybe work and support and conversation. So we had representatives at each school supporting with follow-up and even maybe modeling some of the lessons and support. There was that initial piece, and our school principals were 100% supportive and presented, the initial professional learning. So we've gone back to get feedback on that, as we always do on our curriculum, and again, that informed in December. We had the follow-up, and that feedback informed some of our shifts. So we usually come back at the end of the year and inquire, how do things go? We've added some other pieces to our identity curriculum, for instance, our name identity lessons and some other pieces to our lessons. So we come back to our teachers and get that feedback. But again, that child-centeredness to our professional learning, thinking about the reality of this, because it is for our children, not if this is going to be a situation, because that 2%, I think the research, I think your point around and our thinking about research, it's these are marginalized people in our society, and I think we have to consider safety of all, and research on the harm of hearing a story. Our fifth graders are also learning about enslavement in our colonial town and in our society. So hearing about marginalization of other groups of people is not developmentally inappropriate. They're learning about our colonial history and our history of America. They're also learning about the amazing inventors in our society as well. So they're learning about, at fifth grade, appropriately, all the facets of our society.
And just piggyback one thing, in addition to those professional development opportunities that Carrie mentioned, to those major ones that we had, as we've gone through this process, we're here and we've heard feedback that might come to us. A parent says that a teacher says that, they don't feel prepared or what have you. So we've engaged with our principals and we've asked them to re-engage with their staff, and they've offered the opportunity where if any individual teacher needs any support whatsoever, they have, whether it be the principal, the curriculum specialist, or someone else in their building, to come in and help support them with the lessons. But realistically, once we've gotten through the lessons, through the professional development and the modeling that Carrie describes, and there's good understanding in and around what's expected, and that the expectations really lie along a couple of guiding questions and a read aloud, where the focus is demonstrating respect. Typically the moral of the story is that the students enjoy the same, the same games, the same friendships, the same likes and dislikes, regardless of their gender identity, regardless of their race, their ethnicity, etc. The teachers found that this was not most teachers found that this was not a big lift. It's not really been brought to my attention of significant gaps, but we're always seeking that feedback, as Carrie mentioned, and we have feedback mechanisms to make sure that we're always providing the professional learning that's needed. At the end of the day, I think our teachers do a phenomenal job, so I have every confidence.
Are you all set? Okay. Deb.
Thank you, and thank you so much for this presentation. Can you go back to the slide where you had the lesson targets up there? And the one I want to specifically ask about is, I can identify examples of gender stereotypes. And I find this is such an interesting lesson. And there's been a lot of community engagement around this very topic here. And I think the vast majority of people who have provided feedback, whether in person or by email or any other way, have been very respectful and support most of the social emotional learning curriculum. And they recognize that our efforts to help create our next generation of leaders requires people who can confidently interact with all types of their peers and others. Regarding the gender identity pieces, however, one of the common themes that we've heard relates to whether, in an effort to begin these conversations around accepting diversity, we might actually be reinforcing gender stereotypes. So, you know, a lot of us who grew up in the 70s and 80s, and this was like the prime time for Sesame Street and the implementation of Title IX, we were taught that girls could dress like boys, boys could become nurses, girls could become U.S. senators and champion athletes and Supreme Court justices. And the framing back then was to sort of ignore gender stereotypes and just move past them, to not acknowledge them, to instead just act as if they didn't exist and that there were no barriers to being who you wanted and how you wanted to be that way. And so I think that this is one of the sources of discomfort in our community right now, because we're now reframing the way that we think about stereotypes. And this is like a complete analogy with race and all other things. I can at least speak for me, growing up north of Boston in the 70s and 80s, it was, we don't see color, there are no barriers for girls, you can be whatever you want. And we're changing the way that we talk about these things now in recognition of the fact that we haven't really necessarily made all of the improvements that we thought we would make by teaching kids of our generation, my generation, to just not think about stereotypes. So this shift and this reframing, I think, is a little uncomfortable for some people, and I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the benefit of identifying gender stereotypes instead of kind of ignoring them and telling our kids, you can just be whatever you want.
Thanks, Deb. It's a great question, and it's a really great question. I heard the question as well from some of the public, and I was, I had to soak it in and I had to appreciate it, because I wanted to understand what folks were initially concerned about, and I think you characterized it very well, which was, a good perspective for me to be able to try to talk to folks about and do more research around. What immediately comes to mind is, and I won't have the year and I don't have the website handy, but I could come up with it. But it was a study that was done fairly recently, and it was in Great Britain, and it was done with kindergarten students. And they were asked, and I apologize, I don't think I've used this at the board table, but I know I've shared it with others when they've asked this question. They asked students in a kindergarten classroom to just draw a picture of a firefighter, draw a picture of a pilot, and draw a picture of a doctor. And as you might guess, the overwhelming majority, and I can't quote the specifics, but it was the overwhelming majority of students, both male and female, drew pictures of male characters as firefighters, pilots, and doctors. And then what they did was they brought in 3 guest speakers that were dressed up. The pilot was fully in pilot garb with a pilot's helmet on. The firefighter was fully dressed up with a big firefighter's hat. And then I don't know what the doctor had. I think it was like a surgical mask over their face, so that they initially couldn't identify the gender of the individuals. And of course, the shock value was when they took off all of those things, they were all female role models in these professions. And the students, and it's all on film, and to watch the children's reaction, the surprise and the awe, and then the conversations that happened, it was a demonstration that at a very early age, these stereotypes are just learned, and they're not explicitly taught or anything else. It's just, there's a, at the end of the day, no matter what, there's a research study that I was reading that basically says if a child is in contact with societal influences, if they're in front of TV, if they're out with their families at stores, if they go to movies, if they go to school, society inundates them with subtle messages all the time that trains potentially stereotypes or bias. I reflected on that as I was thinking about it, my own granddaughter, and sure, I'm always trying to do the things that are educationally sound and responsible, encourage her in STEM. I give her educational games, but I think about the amount of influences between myself, my wife, her parents, and the percentages of which those things might fall along gender stereotypical lines. And so the need for it, and I need only reflect back on our last Board of Education report on computer science and the underrepresentation of females, there is a genuine impact to these hidden messages. And so I would respectfully offer that the approach of not encouraging people through direct instruction that says, sure, we recognize there are gender stereotypes, but they're just stereotypes. They're just that. You can have examples, and we seek to provide those positive examples. I think back to the Title IX celebration of some of the amazing female graduates that we've had and the incredible things that they've gone on to do. And being able to ensure that we're putting those good models and those good examples in front of children. There's a great text that we identified in support of that in 4th grade. I believe it's called Mary Wears What She Wants. And it's the story, and I forget her last name, but she's an actual Congressional Medal of Honor recipient. She lived in I think it was the 1800s, and was involved in the Civil War. And she, during the time it was conventional to wear dresses and this, and Mary wanted to wear pants, and that's what she did. So there's a great historical lesson within that. There's a great role model lesson in terms of the accomplishments of this very spectacular individual who happened to be female. And then there's a great gender stereotype lesson in it that provides students with the knowledge and understanding that it is okay to have that ability for self-expression. There are other, the pink is for boys kind of a thing. Pink, it gets really, the moral of that story is pink is for anyone. Girls can play with trucks and things of this nature. Like, it's okay to have these interests, and the books go through it. And we can appreciate some of those stereotypes as adults, but as the moral of the story and the whole lesson that's being instructed is for students to realize that it's okay to have interests outside what what you might later call a gender norm.
Other questions? Comment? Gail?
I want to go back to the question of why I want to talk for a minute about the state mandates in terms of SEL, but particularly in gender. And you can correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding is that in the 5th grade or the 8th grade, I'm not sure which one, the state does mandate a lesson on gender, possibly gender identity. So we are not really in compliance with the state mandate because we've introduced this much earlier. And my question is, why are we not following the state mandates or whatever guidance on this particular issue when I'm sure we're following the state mandates and guidance on most things?
No, I thank you. I would say that we're absolutely following the state mandates. The state talks about the use of pronouns, and that is within the 4th and 5th grade that we teach that, and that is in accordance with state guidelines. The state talks about, when you talk about teaching about and connecting, having a further discussion about, okay, let's talk, and I could pull up the specific, I had the specific learning objective identified, but it's students will be able to identify the differences between gender identity, gender expression, biological anatomy, and sexual orientation. And that's a middle school health standard that's taught in our middle school health. That is not what we're teaching at the elementary level. We do there's no mandate that says from the state that you cannot acknowledge the existence of folks who are gender questioning, transgender, etc. So we're not in conflict or not in compliance with any state mandate, and it kind of gets back to what is it that we're teaching. We're teaching lessons in and around respect for individuals and their self-expression. So one of our books in the, I'm trying to think of one of our texts, I'll go back to, I need my glasses, I'm sorry. I'll go back to the color red. The red was about the crayon that had, the outside wrapper was different than the color that it drew. And that the notion that throughout the story, this inanimate object, is having trouble because it's trying to conform as it thinks it's a blue crayon because its outside wrapper says blue and it can't draw blue, it can't draw water, it can't draw this, can't draw that. And then eventually, toward the end of the story, it acknowledges all the things that it can draw within the color that it is. And so it moves from a deficit model of seeing itself to a more affirmed model.
It could be applied to so many things.
It's not that technically falls as one of our read aloud stories and one of our lessons under gender identity, although it doesn't mention gender identity, doesn't mention gender. It's really a story that's intended around the objective of having comfort in your self-expression and not looking at conformance and limits that are set upon you from the outside world, but appreciating those things, those skills that you have, and those opportunities that you have to contribute and be valued. So that's why that lesson, while it is the gender identity lesson that we've chosen, is a social emotional learning lesson. It's not a lesson about gender identity, but it's something that if I'm a youth that was questioning my identity, I can connect with that. And I can say, wow, the way I'm thinking about the world might not be the right way. I should think about what I have to offer, not what, the reasons why I feel like I don't have something to offer because I feel differently than this, So that's not an overt sort of a piece. It's not in conflict with anything. It's not an indoctrination, and it's not trying to overtly teach something about sexuality or realistically or gender identity and the difference between gender identity and anatomy. Those are not objectives, and they're not topics that come up in the story. They're not objectives of the story. The objective of the story is for people to have a more assets kind of a benefit outlook instead of a deficit outlook. So in that way, I honestly, Gail, I don't think that we would in any way, shape, or form not be in compliance. And where we do get to in 5th grade, and you talked about I Am Jazz, and I Am Jazz actually comes under gender stereotypes as a lesson, and it's a 5th grade text. And it does acknowledge the fact that there's a 5th grade character, Jazz, who's gender nonconforming, but it talks specifically about stereotypes within that. The idea that while, I am this person, I can still like these things, it's all about the likes and the dislikes. It's not about, it's not trying to teach anything that would be in any way, shape, or form construed as not in compliance with a...
Yeah, I think compliance was probably not the right term.
No, but I appreciate...
Yeah, I think what I was trying to say is that the state doesn't mandate in any way that we teach about gender identity in the early elementary school. I'm not saying we're not in compliance, I'm just saying that there is no state mandate for that, whereas, for example, like the pronouns, there is a state mandate.
Sure. I mean, my best response, we have a responsibility for the state to to ensure that we're setting conditions, because that's really the way that I look at this curriculum. It's the conditions that we're setting for children to feel safe, to feel accepted, to see themselves reflected. That's the guidance that we have received. It's like a safe school climate concept, and we're trying to recognize and acknowledge all the diversity that we have here in the district and not be excluding. It would feel awkward to me to say that we're going to acknowledge, all different aspects of identity except for this group. And that's all that we're trying to do, is that acknowledgement and acceptance. So I don't know if that answers your question. I cut you off. I apologize.
Yeah, it does.
All right.
I really don't mean to put you on the hot seat, but something that just keeps gnawing away during this entire presentation is, again, going back to this, our SEL includes all of these things about identity: disability, culture, race, age, SES, religion, family structure, and yet the only area of discontent that has been vocalized is this gender piece. And I'm wondering if you guys have any thoughts as to why this is.
I've thought a little about that. It starts to stem into the realm of, personal conjecture. But, Jason made comments earlier this evening about the fact that it's been a topic that's been relatively taboo for quite a while, hasn't been talked about openly in society. When I was in school, essentially the same thing was true about the LGBT community. It was a taboo topic. It wasn't discussed. Personal experience, speaking only as Paul, it generated the potential for fear. Oh, if I have a friend that comes out to me and tells me they're gay, and I hang out with that friend, will I be gay? Will I be thought of as gay, etc.? Is that a bad thing? And those were the connotations, because the lack of exposure just, and this is what research tells us, just breeds unintended bias. And typically it's negative, because it is an element, a group of people who are different from the majority, and therefore the emotional connotation is typically negative. And so I think there's any opinion that any individual wants to have on a subject relative to how it aligns with personal beliefs, religious beliefs, etc., is totally separate from the universal that everyone seems to have general agreement with. There's a responsibility that we have to set conditions for all students to be. Schools are a place of acceptance. Schools are a place of safety. Schools are a place where it doesn't matter. Any elements of your identity don't matter. Our responsibility is to you as an individual for your education and for your well-being. Never get any disagreement on that topic. So the notion of a lack of acknowledgement of any one group and the impact that it has, and recognition of the potential negative impact that it has, is not in alignment with that mission to be able to provide. And that's not to say that there's any effort, let me change the topic from gender identity to, let me spin the wheel and I'll just change it to religion. And we have board policy and we have lessons that look at religious traditions. We're not trying to indoctrinate children into any one religion or another. We're not trying to say that your religion is less positive than this other religion. We are simply trying to provide exposure for students to recognize there are those individuals who have different religion than you may have, and they're still good people, and you can still be friends with them, and you could still play with them on the playground. Replace religion with race, ethnicity, skin color, replace it with physical ability, disability. Our goal is neither to promote, indoctrinate, defend, debate any of the attributes of identity, merely to acknowledge and affirm our common humanity.
Ari, it's a really good question, and it's a hard one for us to answer from where we sit on this side of the topic. But it is one that we're trying to better understand through listening, and we think that we'll be able to get there. I do feel confident that in our plans, communication plans, going forward with schools, we'll be able to understand better where some of the angst is coming from. So for right now, we're trying to clarify any confusion or misconceptions that are out there. And but we welcome people to come forward and share what specifically gives them pause or consternation around this topic.
And like these are some stories, right, from authors, and Gail, I was listening to your comments, and we teach children to understand in fifth grade, all along the way, but in fifth grade, this is a story of a child. But I really do look forward to hearing stories from our community. We've heard the stories of families who have felt marginalized in our community, and we've needed to respond. We have an obligation to respond, but we also have an obligation to respond to parents who are concerned with what's happening and feel for their children that this may not be the right thing. So we appreciate that, but we need to have an appropriate forum to do that. And so this was the starting point, I hope, of a reset to the conversation, and to have a place in the forum to do that. And we appreciate your listening and your good questions to help us get there. Claire, yes.
When I look at the chart, I do think even a school-based conversation about disability is helpful. But all the things in that chart, most people can define. You're not going to get a big argument about the definition. But when it comes to gender, it isn't something everybody is as comfortable with defining, understanding the changes that we've seen in schools and the changes that are not as hidden. Because for a very long time, there were gender issues that were hidden. And we didn't talk about them, we didn't have stories about them, and those many people stayed hidden. And so I do think there's a lack of knowledge about that one section, that these school-based conversations and time to just learn what it is, what it isn't, be able to share your fears, talk to the teachers, talk to the people in your community. I think it's really great, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys do this fall.
Ethan.
Just one thing, and I think Rosina sort of hit on it, but just to build on it. When you define success, because you do have success, to talk about the workshops, my hope is it's more in bringing people together by going out and talking to particularly those who have struggled with this. Because I think if you communicate, you may not get everybody to have what you want, and people may not agree, but at least the communication's there, and it can be hopefully somewhere where there's a balance and everybody feels like it's part of, because it's not healthy to have such division. So that'd be my one request.
No, I agree, Ethan, and I would want my measure.
Trying to get there too.
My measure of success would be that folks have that understanding of what we're trying to do, and that they trust that regardless of where they are on any spectrum, that they recognize we're not trying to overstep family conversations. And I know we're not there today based on what I hear, through email or through public comment, but I do hope that we're going to get there.
I think a willingness to communicate is critical. And I think if you're doing that, which sounds like you are, and I have no reason to doubt it, that's critical, because people do feel, just from listening to them and the emails, out of alignment, or they can't speak. So, thank you.
Other questions, comments? Jason?
So I wanted to ask about the Youth at Risk survey. And I just can't remember if we've talked about that before. It's been, what's that?
It's been years.
It's been years.
It's been on hold. We generally do it every 2 to 3 years. The last time we administered it was in 2018. We did not have the opportunity to administer it, or we did not take the opportunity, I should say, to administer it during the pandemic. But I expect that we'd likely be looking to do that again. And it informs our, our youth at risk relative to any range of topics, be that substance abuse, there's sexual risk behaviors at a young age, all manner of things, and we then try to look at to see if we have the appropriate education and programming. I seem to remember, Andy, correct me if I'm wrong, like vaping came up one year as there were a lot of students that were engaged in vaping, so we said, we need to put some educational programming in relative to the risks of vaping because it seems to be taking off and at a younger and younger age, and we just want to make sure that students and families, are informed of, any potential hazards, because for a while there was a myth out in the public, like, this is like the safe form of tobacco usage or what have you. So that's like a very, very broad definition of what it is.
Sorry, just want to get a little bit more understanding. Is it something that all districts use? Is this a model that has been developed here?
So there is a state model for the Youth at Risk survey that we have aligned to. However, we found, some of the questions, some of the formatting in the state model to be a little bit unwieldy. So we've customized it, and we have the ability to do so. It's not, we're not precluded from doing that. We have also at times partnered with some town agencies as it specifically relates to grants that they've received, to not only if they help and support us in the implementation of the survey, grant money can then be afforded to help with services in response to any identified needs within the town. So we've enjoyed that partnership in the past as well. But we've done it both ways. We've done it on our own. We've done it in support.
Do we know if there's any funding for this in SB1 with the student mental health bill?
I don't have that knowledge off the top of my head.
I don't recall specifically if there's anything targeting that, Jason, but there is certainly increased funding at the state level, and certainly increased interest in providing resources not only for student mental health, but to identify students that are struggling, whether it be with identity, whether it's with addiction, whether it's with certain other behavior risks.
Is there a plan for when it will be done again, or is that under assessment of the availability of funding and grants?
No, it's probably been more just the availability of time. So I would expect, I'm gonna say I would expect we'd probably be administering it again in next school year.
That's 22, 23.
22, 23.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? All right. Well, thank you so very much. Echo all that was shared, questions, enlightenment. Thank you so very much for sharing with us where we were and where we are now, and cannot echo enough how greatly appreciated it is. It is, you are. And I'm just thinking again of our role as board members, and we have 3 primary roles, one of them certainly being policy, not only to implement policy, but to uphold policy. And we know we have Educational Equity Policy 1800, which supports this and advocates for this. And it's important for us to know, teammates and those who may be viewing, that when it comes to upholding policy, it's not an a la carte approach. When it comes to our educational equity policy, it's not an a la carte, well, I'll apply it here, but maybe not there. It is one where it refers to all of our students. So thank you so very much for ensuring to do that. And we know that when conversations are had and topics are addressed, people respond differently. So thank you for receiving the questions. Thank you for receiving the concerns. And I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge again the importance of talking about this, because we know there are certain topics, let's say 70 plus years ago, that would not have been very welcomed in some communities, certainly as it comes to race relations. And there were persons who responded then with, oh, no, 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 no. But look how far we've come. But if we did not get clear evidence this weekend of how far we still have to go. So those that may still not be convinced of the challenges our society continues to deal with, well, please, we had a very stark reminder of that this weekend. And so thank you again for being proactive with these measures. We look forward to hearing the updates in the fall. Thank you. And so with that, we now will go to our personnel report, and we'll have Mr. Julio Duarte, who's been quite patient. Thank you so much.
All right, good evening, everyone. So our personnel report can be found on page 8 of your packet. And as you can see, this is one of our largest personnel reports, as it primarily reflects the end-of-year resignations as well as the end-of-year retirements. Since my last personnel report to the board, we did hire 2 contracted teachers as well as 2 interim teachers. So just a reminder, folks that are on contracted teachers are someone who we're hoping to see stay with us for the long haul, and an interim teacher is essentially filling in for a teacher that's out on leave. So this year we had 16 end-of-year resignations and 21 end-of-year retirements. I can say that I had the privilege of meeting with many of the folks that are retiring, and it was truly a highlight of my day to see their energy and their passion and their dedication, some of them after 30 years of being in education, yeah, Jason, is really something to be just admired. And I know that, and I know many of them personally too. And so I know they've left certainly a legacy behind in their building, and I think throughout the district. So I want to just take a moment and personally thank them on behalf of the district for their service to students and families. With that said, our turnover rate for the year looks like we'll be heading towards about 4%. So again, that is made up of primarily our retirees. We do anticipate getting a few resignations over the summer. That tends to be typical. But in terms of staff recruitment, I have to say that I am truly pleased with our efforts thus far. I think we knew going into this that we wanted to be very proactive, and we've been very proactive, not only in my office, but I think all of the administrators really just being diligent about that. So we've attended multiple career fairs, including UConn and CREC's Minority Recruitment Fair. We held our own West Hartford career fair, which was very successful. And I'm pleased to report that we've already identified several candidates, several very strong candidates that we see as great fits to join our West Hartford family, and are moving forward in that process. I also wanted to just quickly report on our leadership roles, since we do have a couple openings. So depending on which we're looking at, we're at various stages in the process. So certainly in our social studies department supervisor, tomorrow we'll be wrapping up our first round of interviews. Really pleased with the candidate pool there. A lot of experienced folks, some new folks, and so it's been great to go through. And I think it's always energizing. One of the things I've been doing in my role is just meeting with all of the candidates that come in to interview for any leadership role. And it's been great just for me to talk to them, but also to hear just the perspective of other folks of what they see as West Hartford and why they're coming here. And so it's just a good reminder that we're doing a lot of really, really good work that's really attracting some strong candidates because they believe in the work that we're doing. So I think that's always great for me to just reinforce and recalibrate. As far as the Conard principal position, so we'll start that interview process next week. Again, had a good applicant pool for that, and excited to go through and see those candidates. And then we're also working on creating and gathering stakeholder feedback so that we can create the leadership profile for Charter Oak. So last week I sent surveys out to all of the parents and caregivers, also sent those to the staff at Charter Oak, have sent an email inviting any member of the Charter Oak staff that would like to meet with me personally for one-on-one interviews. I'd be happy to do that. And we'll be hosting a I guess what would you call it, a conversation with the HR director for parents and guardians in the morning for Charter Oak, and one in the evening, so that I can hear feedback as well from that community. So I feel very confident that I'll have a strong sense of what that community is looking for. We know that's a very important hire for us, and all of them are. Particularly, we want to really pay attention to that, and I think we'll have a strong leadership profile that we'll be able to post and also begin with that process. So that is where we are right now, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that the board may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions, comments regarding, yes, Claire?
Yeah, I was just looking at the teacher resignations, and about 10 of them were only a year, and many of them special education. And I'm just wondering, with the shortages in special education, are these resignations, are we looking for special ed teachers, or, is there a shortage right now? And do you know what we're doing to try to get more special ed?
Sure. So I know Melissa's been actively recruiting, and her team looking at applications. Again, during some of those career fairs, I was highlighting and actually texting her right after interviews with folks. They're saying, hey, here's someone put on your radar at our career fair she's identified. So they've actually gone through and interviewed several folks. If you remember back to when I did our non-tenure renewal meeting, we had several folks on there that really are strong candidates too. So we're continuing to reach out to them. And again, I don't want to say that it's not going to be a heavy lift, but it's certainly a lift that we know needs to happen. And we also, it's really important, I've been stressing this with all of our administrators, is regardless of what we think, I don't want to rush any process. It's really important that we go through and we diligently meet with candidates, we go through that process, and we make sure that they're the right fit for us. And so, again, we'll go through that. I'm confident that Melissa is doing a great job with her team, and they're actively looking at that. As far as too, I do just want to highlight, you look at something that says, it's a 1 year, they've been here 1 year. It's hard to pinpoint, and I've had conversations with folks with exit interviews. I offer anyone that's resigning or leaving the opportunity to meet with me for an exit interview, and some folks have taken me up on that. And a lot of it's various reasons. To be honest with you, it's not a West Hartford, even a teaching piece. It's families relocating, partners or spouses getting different opportunities that now puts them in a different role within their family structure. So, we want to be understanding of all situations. And again, it's good for me to meet with them because I want to make sure that there's no theme that we need to be looking at or theme that we should be worried about. And there's nothing that has come up. So I appreciate the question, though.
Jason.
Yeah, Julio, thanks for the report. I noticed one of the teachers here is educated in Massachusetts and from Pennsylvania, and it triggered a thought about out-of-state teacher certification. And what does that look like for us? I can't remember what the legislative landscape is for hiring teachers with Connecticut in-state certification, given that we're looking at potential shortages in the future. Can you remind us what does that landscape look like?
Right, so there certainly is a certification process they need to go through. To be honest, Connecticut tends to be one of the hardest districts to get certification rolled in. And we're actually working with one of a teacher that's looking to come here from Massachusetts and really struggling to go through that process. And they have their doctorate. They were in the same role in Massachusetts for many years, and everything we've seen, they're a real rock star candidate. And we're just struggling with some of the pieces that we need to get and go through with the state of Connecticut. I can tell you that we've got several folks, really one in my office that's outstanding at going and supporting people through this process, because it's nerve-wracking, it's not easy. And to go back to that person, one of the things they actually had to do, believe it or not, was go back and contact their professors in college that some of them were 10 years ago and ask them for their syllabi. And we had to present that to the state. So I appreciate the laughter, although I don't know that it's been a laughing matter, because it has been a lot of work, and I appreciate the professors being so accommodating, but that's the type of thing that we're working with, and certainly expressing that to the state and asking for some flexibility and asking them to be accommodating. But I think it's important, and that's one of the things, again, that attracts candidates to West Hartford. They know that we have people that are going to work with them and not just say, hey, here's what you need to do, let us know when you got it. Someone in my office will actually follow up. We have great relationships with people on the state level to be able to actually call. Instead of just go email back and forth, get on the phone and say, can you just tell us exactly what it is that you need so that we can communicate that with our person and go through that. So, but I wish I could say, Jason, that it was easier. It actually seems the opposite. Folks leaving Connecticut to go to other states seems to be very easy. Sometimes it's just filling out a form and paying some money, but that's not the case vice versa. So,
Okay, thanks for the update.
Yeah.
Other questions? Gail.
Yeah, I just was curious, are these numbers of resignations and retirements about average? Are they high?
They are. They're about average. Actually, I had spoken to Liz earlier today, and she had projected 25 retirements. So we actually came in a little bit below that. Again, there may be some, typically with retirements, they would have told us by now. Resignations, we may see some pieces here and there. And on some levels, I think it's average, and I'm not overly surprised. And a lot of people I've talked to, like I said, they actually kind of hung in there because they didn't want COVID to be their final year. And so I think had we have not had COVID, they may have gone. But in their mind, they wanted to try to go out on normal terms. And so they've gone through some of that.
Other questions, comments? All right. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now we will move on to routine matters, approval of the minutes. Looking to approve the minutes of the May 3rd, 2022 regular Board of Education meeting. Is there a motion?
I motion to accept.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All of those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. All right, thank you. Now on to information and reports. Board members, do we have any communications and reports from other boards? Ethan?
Well, it's not from another board, but it was just sort of disclosure type thing. At last board meeting we had 2 weeks ago, one of the speakers during open communication identified 2 policies that they said that we had not fulfilled in terms of, or were out of compliance, in terms of the team nicknames. And I got a couple emails over the weekend indicating that from other people. So I did go back to Lorna last night, because I was about to take the red eye, and asked if we could have the corporate counsel look into it, because I think we want to be in compliance. So just to let everybody know that I did request that.
Thank you, yes. And so thank you so much, Ethan. Yes, you did, and that request has been passed on to our corporate counsel. They are looking into that. Dr. Morrow, please, if you would like to add additional.
I'm just going to say, Ethan, yeah, we did have that conversation. We did pass that on to the corporate counsel. I can tell you that their initial response was that, we've discussed this matter. They're confident that the procedure we followed was the right procedure to do so, and they're going to follow up on that with a letter.
I appreciate it. I just figure we should.
No, absolutely. It's a good question to ask.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ethan. Other updates from other boards, comments? All right, I do have a brief one. Just speaking on behalf of the Foundation for West Hartford Public Schools, as we certainly know, this is a wonderful foundation that helps to raise funds and to create grants for our teachers to apply for. And the results of that grant funding goes back into our classrooms and our school system. So it definitely is a win-win that's mutually beneficial. And there is a new grant that has been issued. You get the correct name of it, and it's the Tom Moore Superintendent Grant. The intent is to raise $26,000, representing the 26 years, or more than 26 years, that Tom Moore has contributed to our district. So want to share that effort that's underway, please certainly do reach out to the foundation. You can reach them online and contribute. And not only for this wonderful effort, for this grant, but there are other grants as well, other grant funding. This is something that happens year-round. For those of us who recall our pre-COVID days, we certainly remember the West Hartford Cook-In, with the apostrophe at the end. And that was a wonderful event that happened just down the hall, that collected and gathered many individuals, lots of festivities, but unfortunately because of the pandemic, that has been put on hold. But very impressed with the foundation, for they have continued to be eager and persistent and find ways of raising funds. And again, it's for our students, it's for our classrooms, so please certainly want to give that recognition. Any other comments or updates? Board matters? All right. So we now shall move on to non-communications and reports, but we've already had that. Thank you so much, Dr. Morrow, for speaking on behalf of our student representatives. On to future business, announcement of future meeting dates. Tuesday, June the 7th, 2022, regular Board of Education meeting at 7 o'clock here in the Legislative Chamber, room 313. This will be our last Board of Ed meeting of the academic school year. Do we have a request for future agenda items? Comments from visitors. Do we have any visitors here that would like to make a comment? All right, if you can please approach the podium, share your name and your address, please. And the same rules apply, 3 minutes per individual, 21 minutes per subject matter. Charlotte will hold a yellow card when you're down to 1 minute and a red card when your time is expired.
Thank you. Lori Schwartz, 1 Timber Lane. I just want to speak briefly about policymaking in West Hartford. And what I want to comment on is that, number one, I was very impacted by hearing the different opinions by the various board members here. And I can see that there are varying opinions about the gender policy that is being proposed to be implemented. And in setting policy, before doing so, I think is very important when you have diverse opinions within the board, when a member of the diversity committee has openly admitted that there are materials that they are using because other more adequate materials have not yet been published. I think we need to take that very seriously. There's an absence of good research to support the program that you're putting into effect. Interest groups have not met yet to consider and to really digest the opposing viewpoints of other parents in this town. And we know that there are many parents who do not look at gender as a social construct, but look at it more from a medical, biological standpoint. There's no opportunity to exempt children from this program. And also looking at the past in West Hartford, because I was a student here and a teacher, in 1972, the West Hartford Individualized Math Program was one that the parents were vehemently opposed to and felt it would be a failure. The board went ahead and approved that policy, and it failed many children in this town. Here we're talking about an ideology that ultimately leads to medical interventions and permanent changes in a child's body. And I would ask you as a board, you have everything you need right now. You can be respectful to children. You can nurture any trans child who walks into your school. You have psychologists to deal with them. You have parent conferences to deal with that. You can teach respect. Every teacher in this town knows how to treat children with respect and kindness. And you do not need to implement a program that has not been researched, has not been approved by the parents, and for which materials that are appropriate have not yet been devised. I'm asking you to halt this program for the sake of the children in this town and for the parents, to really show that you believe in diversity and that you respect the parents in this town.
Thank you. Are there any other comments?
Thank you. My name is Mary from Acadia Street, and I would simply like to follow that with the true meaning of the word gender, which is being misappropriated broadly, which I really hadn't learned that myself before the last 1 month. The word gender comes from the Greek root gen, which means to give birth. And I was very so warmed to learn about Dr. Harris's career because while I voted for you, I really didn't know that you are an OBGYN. And so when we speak about gender, we're really not speaking about one sex or another sex or non-sex, this terminology called non-binary, because without the physical capacity to give birth and lineage, which is written down, if you look at many words which have those root meanings in them, It all means progeny, moving forward. And in the meanwhile, our world is suffering a crisis of near to zero birth rate. And it has been stated and promulgated just within the past 48 hours, I've read that we need to have more people giving birth. And so I would just charge the board that this meaning of gender has been misappropriated. It really means two complementary sexes that are not alike, and there's no spectrum within that. They're completely different, and everything that's being talked about in what they call gender identity is really personality traits. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other comments? Any other comments? All right, so with that, we do not have an executive session. Seeking a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
The meeting adjourned at 10:14.